I heard you for a second. You just got to hold it down while you talk.
Okay, am I coming through?
Yes, I forgive you for your transgressions. How are you doing? You do have to remember to hold it when you're talking.
Okay,
Yeah,
so I'm coming through.
you are loud and clear.
Okay,
Do you want?
terrific.
Should I just call you Ants40, or do you have a name? Got any preference there?
Ansaris, yeah, call me Ansaris. That's my name. It's a little
Ansaris. Okay, I'll try Ansaris.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. And so, what's the background here? You're a political science PhD, and you're a Vaush fan, and you want to defend his position, or am I missing something there?
I did political economy, international development.
Okay.
I'm a fan of Vaush's channel. As I said, I don't agree with everything he said, and even in this interaction that you had with him, I think he's made a few mistakes and confuses a few things. So hopefully you can flesh that out.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, you've probably seen the argument against his position. The idea is to defend it without ending up somewhere, kind of crazy, like where he ended up. What he ended up saying was, after he finished contradicting himself repeatedly by making the universally quantified statement that for any action, if it maximizes negative utility to a high enough degree, then the action's unethical. But there exists an action that maximizes negative utility to this degree, yet is not unethical, right? That's just a contradiction. Once he finished contradicting himself, he just committed to the second portion of the contradiction, which landed him in this pretty insane reductio, where he's saying that it's ethical to buy a stake under capitalism, even if buying that stake causes galaxies of people to be tortured to death. So, the idea here is basically, I just want someone to defend this view without backing off of his prior statements. Like, if you abandon utilitarianism, then that's kind of not doing what you would need to do to defend Vaush's view. That's like you putting forward your own kind of view. And without ending up in one of these sort of insane reductios, like saying it's fine to, holocaust galaxies of people for a single piece of steak. So do you, do you have anything to say about that, or?
Yeah, so I can just say, well, first of all, I think...
Yeah, you're gonna have to remember to hold that PTT button. As long as you're holding the button, I'll hear you, but once you let go, you just cut out.
Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear. As long as you're holding the button, I'm hearing you.
Okay, great. So yeah, I think Nosh, he makes a mistake. I don't know why he calls himself a utilitarian and a Marxist, especially since Marx, launched numerous critiques against utilitarians of his time. But I think what Vaush is trying to say here is that if alienation is present, and I'm looking at the formalization of his argument that you provided, which is helpful. But what Vaush, I think, is trying to actually say is that when an actor is sufficiently alienated from the consequences of his action, then at that point, this threshold is never triggered. So if alienation isn't present, then there's a certain degree of utility. If there's an action that creates a certain amount of disutility, it's okay to call that action immoral. But if alienation is present, then that threshold is never actually triggered. And he's coming at this still with a utilitarian framework, but I think he's using Marx's notion of alienation. Are you familiar with it at all, or?
Not super familiar, but as far as I understand, it's got to do with, you can correct the holes in my understanding, but the idea is you can be alienated from your labor, and I don't know how to define it, but I know that some of these terms like alienation or exploitation, on Marx's view, they aren't necessarily normative. They're supposed to be kind of descriptive things that don't carry a moral component to them. I don't know, you can give me the definition though, or the explanation.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So he believes Marx would argue it's an objective reality and a subjective experience. So just to give a brief definition, when somebody's alienated from the consequences of their actions, it's because there are multiple intermediate layers between the action and the outcome of that action. So the example he gives is that when you have increasing specialization of labor or the division of labor, then the worker is alienated from the final product. One, he doesn't own it, but also you can't point to any one assembly line and say that worker's participation or contribution or action is what created that commodity, right? So there's multiple different layers between action and outcome. And so I think what Vaush seems to be arguing here is that when you have that alienation present, it's not actually, the idea of creating disutility through one action or that individual action isn't actually applicable. And so that's why, this threshold never gets triggered when alienation is present. For the same reason, you can't point to one worker and say his participation on the assembly line at GM created, the automobile. You can't actually point to one individual purchase and say that purchase actually created or, created the outcome where, galaxies of suffering take place or where animals were slaughtered, or even where just one cow or pig was actually slaughtered, right? It's a multitude of, there's multitudes of intermediate layers, and there's an aggregate, aggregation of actions which could contribute to that outcome, but one person's actions can't. And so that's alienation. So when that's present, he seems to be saying, as far as I understand it, that you can't actually say that an outcome or an action is immoral because that threshold never gets triggered when that's present. So does that make sense at all?
So I have an idea what you're saying, but I'm trying to feed it into the argument and understand what premise it's an objection to. Like, presumably it's an objection to P1 because that's what Vaush and I were talking about.
Yeah, so if I'm just looking at the formalization of his argument that you provided, P1, if there's no action for which there is no threshold of negative utility, and there is no consideration other than utility. So he would want to add to that and say the consideration is utility and the degree to which an actor is alienated from the consequences of the action. We can just, encapsulate that with an alienation. And then you would have to add alienation to P3 as well. So when you do that, I think the implications of his conclusion or his argument are rather different than than the reductio you offered. Because in the reductio you give, where you say biting into a steak or buying a steak causes galaxies of suffering, there's a very clear link between the action and the outcome within that reductio. So alienation isn't present. So in that case, I think, of course the threshold is triggered. You can call the action immoral. But as he said, I don't know if you listened to what he said after, he threw you off the call, but what he tried to clarify was he was saying if you buy
just to be charitable to him, he didn't technically throw me off the call. He had me muted. Got criticized for not being fully accurate about that, but yeah, please continue.
Okay. Yeah, right. So anyways, when you left the call or when you got muted, he actually said buying a steak, if that causes galaxies of suffering, yes, that's wrong. Pushing a button and that causes galaxies of suffering, yes, that's wrong. But if you purchase a steak and the money from that steak goes to incentivize the operations of a corporation and they may plow some of that money back into operations to produce cattle or to actually breed more livestock into existence, and there's all these intermediate layers between your purchase and the final outcome, just as there are all these intermediate layers between a worker participating on an assembly line and the production of a commodity, then in that case there's this, you can't talk about causality in that direct fashion. And so therefore he would say that action can't be immoral, or he wouldn't label it as immoral. I think that's the gist of his general argument.
So just to be clear, is what you're trying to do offer the objection to P1 that, like, under this kind of understanding, it's actually logically impossible for the purchase of a steak to generate that amount of suffering?
When alienation is present to that degree in a capitalist society, yes, that would be the argument.
Okay, because that's... Yeah, because I think that's a kind of fundamentally different thing than what he's doing. So, because what he's doing, let's see, so the first premise is just saying that if avoiding meat produced through capitalism maximizes well-being to a high degree, then we oughtn't buy meat produced through capitalism. So, you're saying that something about that premise is actually logically impossible? Like, it's not the case that avoiding meat produced through capitalism could maximize well-being to a high degree?
Yes,
if alienation is present? Sorry, you pushed up. And he dropped out again. Drag him back here. Okay. you for some, I don't know why he does that. And for some reason you leave the call sometimes. I don't know why that is, but you go over to the other channel. I assume you're back though. So yeah, I was just asking if you're trying to say that the first premise, which says if avoiding meat produced through capitalism maximizes well-being to a high degree, then we oughtn't buy meat produced through capitalism. Are you trying to say that's logically impossible, like something about that, in the same way as like you try to like get a Christian with like, hey, you know, what if God said, you know, that it's ethical to like murder people, and then they say, well, no, it's like part of God's nature that he couldn't do that. It's like part of how he's defined. So the situation presents like a logical impossibility. So what you're asking them, they can't even like offer a reply to. It's impossible. Is that the kind of move? Got to push to talk. I don't know what to say. I keep dragging you back, but for some reason you keep leaving the channel. I assume you're just not familiar with Discord.
Yeah, I'm not familiar. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. No worries, it's fine.
Okay, I don't know how that's happening. I'm sorry. I'm trying to work around this. Yes. Okay. So that is what he would be arguing. When alienation is present, it's logically impossible for one individual action to contribute to the outcome in the way that your reductio captured, you know, the connection between action and outcome. And I'm basing this not just on conjecture, but on a number of statements he made in the exchange with you and after you were muted. And that seems to be what his position is. And so the critique of your reductio would be that it didn't capture alienation in the fashion that he expects, you know, alienation to mediate action and outcome.
Yeah, so I guess that the problem I have is it seems like you're adding a further condition that's not like specified in the premise, and then saying that if you add that further condition, you get a logical impossibility. But that doesn't seem quite like saying that what's described in the premise is logically impossible, unless I'm misunderstanding you.
No, yeah, I think the way the formalization of his argument is written now, you're right. It's not in the, it's not in that premise. We would have to add that condition. But what I'm saying is that I think that's what he wanted to do, right? Based on statements, he repeatedly tried to say one caveat: when an actor is, you know, alienated from the consequences of their actions, then this doesn't hold. Then the threshold isn't actually triggered, right? I don't know if he saw this formalization and okayed it, or if he just wasn't able to clarify his position. But the number of times you referred to alienation and gave the examples leads me to believe that that's something that he was actually trying to specify, that he wanted that condition in the premise.
Yeah, so he did sign off on this formalization in his Discord. But I'm tripped out that you keep referring to his argument, because I'm talking about the counter-argument, which, like, the counter-argument is the one with 4 premises. It's like, you know, if avoiding the meat maximize utility, then we oughtn't do it. If avoiding all commodity purchases doesn't maximize utility, it's not the case that we oughtn't buy any commodities, then avoiding meat does maximize utility. Avoiding commodity purchases doesn't, therefore we oughtn't buy meat produced through capitalism, and it's not the case that we oughtn't buy any commodity. I'm talking about that argument, like the counter argument, not his initial argument, because the idea with the counter is to falsify the first premise of his argument. So when I ask if the objection is to P1, I'm talking about P1 of the counter-argument. I don't know what's going on your end. Is there, like, are you on like a sketchy computer or a phone or something? Just gotta hold it down.
Is that working?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's try to just resolve that, because it's just becoming a technical issue. What is it that's making that happen? Do you have any idea what you're doing over there?
I'm on my Android and I'm pushing to talk when I speak. Maybe it's just not holding down properly, but I know you can hear me okay now. I'll try
that probably is what it is. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, just
if I keep my thumb on it the whole time, that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm asking if it's an objection to P1 of the counter-argument.
Yeah, that's the one you actually posted on your exchange, right? The third exchange, where you uploaded that to YouTube and you offered the formalization.
Posted on my exchange. Like, do you mean, like, I don't know
You're
what you
showing
mean by
the
that.
yeah on
Like,
the
it's the
YouTube.
argument
It's a
that I
pin.
was running. The pinned
It's on
comment?
YouTube.
Oh, the pinned comment,
it's
I think that's just,
Yes.
I think that's just showing, like, a further little extension of his view or something. That's not the main argument. The argument that I'm running in the discussion, I can put it in general, because I'm sure some people just want to see it, but, like, Vaush gave this first argument, and all of the sort of savvy, Marxist types who are in here, like the ones who have knowledge of the relevant literature and stuff, were looking at P1 of his argument and going like, okay, that's really fucking weird. Like, why would we think something like that? And so we built this counter argument, and what he kept getting hung up on was premise 1 of the counter argument. So I'm sure it's a little difficult when you're on Android to like kind of do this, so it might be worth continuing on a computer, but we can try unless it becomes like too frustrating or something. But the idea is like, if you're trying to object to P1 of the counter argument by saying like that a logical impossibility is entailed here, then it's not clear to me how, because even if we grant, like, just for the sake of argument, let's just say that I don't fully understand the conceptual stuff here with alienation, but let's just say it goes through, that when that property is present, then it's logically impossible for there to be an avoidance of consumption that maximizes utility. The premise doesn't specify that there is alienation present, right? So I'm not quite sure how you're getting to the logical impossibility without like adding something further to the premise.
Okay, yeah. So I'm basing it on just what he was saying during your 3 exchanges, and yeah, I was looking at actually the formula argument to show the reductio in Vaush's view, which is what you pinned. And over there, right, it says the only consideration, there is no consideration other than utility in P1 and P3. And so I'm essentially just saying, and this is what he pointed out, the reductio that you ended up with when you were talking about biting the steak and that causes galaxies of suffering, that doesn't adequately capture his position, because he seems to be saying that when you have that concept of alienation, then this threshold is not triggered. I don't know what his actual formal argument that he gave to you or that he signed off on was. I haven't seen that.
Here, I can copy this also, like, because this isn't actually the argument that I've been asking Vaush fans to defend, but like we can talk about this one too. So this one is just, if there's an action, we'll call it action A, for which there is no threshold of negative utility where it becomes immoral, and there is no consideration other than utility, then if the negative utility of action A is negative infinity, the action still isn't immoral. There is an action, we'll call it action A, for which there is no threshold of negative utility where it becomes immoral. There is no consideration other than utility. Therefore, if the negative utility of action A is negative infinity, action A still isn't immoral. Now, that seems pretty clearly sound to me. I don't know if you want to keep it to me and you, but there's guys in here who do know more Phil than me. There's 1 or 2 people, I think, in here with PhDs who could maybe comment if they think there's something fucked about that argument. But I'm pretty sure that's going to be a sound argument right there. Like, what's
that's the one I was reading. So P3, right? It says there's no consideration other than utility. I'm just saying, Nosh's position seems to be, based on what he kept saying, was that it doesn't matter if alienation is present, this threshold isn't triggered. So there wouldn't just be the consideration of utility.
But that is so. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was done. Yeah.
Well, when I started this off by saying the whole idea here is to not have to back off of Vaush's positions. If he says he's a utilitarian, but then in order for you to defend his position, you have to bring in a consideration other than utility, then that's like basically backing off of the position of utilitarianism. Now, I would accept if you just said that Vaush has been confused all along, and he's never really been a utilitarian. Fair enough, but he has made the statement repeatedly, over and over and over again, that he's a utilitarian. So I would say that this is meeting my condition of backing off of one of his prior statements.
Right, and that's why I started off by saying it's kind of confusing that he says he's a Marxist and a utilitarian, and that's fair. If we're attacking this from the standpoint of just utilitarianism because he's committed to that, I understand. I just think, based on what he seemed to be saying, I think this is where the misunderstanding might be. Now, if he's committed to utilitarianism, it's going to be a little more difficult to defend that. But he got a number of things confused. At one point in your discussion, he said, if you're standing on a mountain and you toss a coin, do you remember this? And if it hits your grandmother's head, and I think
it was a rock,
and her brains spill out right in there. Yeah, a rock or whatever, and he says you're alienated from the consequences of your actions. So it's wrong. That's not alienation as far as I know. That's just, a spatial separation between the act and the outcome. So, the action still is immoral in that situation. If I'm on a mountaintop and I know there's a 50% chance that if I throw a rock off, it's going to hit someone on the head, their brains will spill out, and I choose to do it. The fact that I don't see it or have no knowledge of it or I'm separated from that outcome, it doesn't change the fact that the action is immoral. So he was confusing that with alienation. Alienation, according to the Marxian understanding of it, is all these layers of mediation between the action and the cause, so that one individual's contribution or participation in a process can't be said to produce the outcome or contribute in any significant, meaningful way. And at other times, he seemed to be confusing socialization or cultural indoctrination with alienation as well. And so that's why I think his position, he made mistakes there that might have confused his position.
Yeah, I wonder if he would. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Sometimes I just cut in, my bad. What were you saying? He was confusing social indoctrination and with alienation. He's confusing spatial separation with alienation. It sounded like you were going to say one more thing.
Yeah, exactly. So just to the socialization and cultural indoctrination.
Got to hold the push talk.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so he was saying that if somebody is socialized in an environment or, on a planet we're doing, galaxies, we're committing actions that create galaxies of suffering is the norm, that's okay. But that's socialization, which is different from alienation. And especially since you're talking about actions and not the actor, I don't see how socialization or indoctrination is relevant. If you're on a planet where everybody is socialized to rape or to think rape is okay, the action of rape, you can still say that's immoral because it produces disutility or, suffering. So that's another
push to talk. I'm gonna make a special exception for you and find a way to turn off push to talk for you because
okay, thanks so much.
It's just deadly right now. Let's see. Ants 40. I also see an Ansari 39. Is that another one of your accounts? Okay, you have voice activity permissions. You'll have to actually switch over to voice activity in your settings, but maybe you should just take a second and do that so we don't have this problem.
Okay, all right, I'll go do.
Yeah, the reason we like the push to talk is because it eliminates a lot of background noise, so it's nice for recordings. But I think that probably all agree that background noise is preferable to extended periods of dead silence. Did you?
Okay.
You get that fixed?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear. So, did you have
great.
more to say there, or?
No, so just I was ending by saying that he confuses socialization and cultural indoctrination with alienation and spatial separation, between victim or actor and outcome at times, and yeah.
So I want to do something that he won't do for me. I can't help but take a shot at him here. Vaush refuses to defend his position against me anymore on this topic, as far as I understand. I consider that pretty weak. But something he won't do is analyze what I'm saying charitably. I want to be charitable to him, though. He might not be necessarily confusing alienation with spatial separation. He might be saying that there's like a common property there, like an alleviation of moral responsibility or something, kind of in virtue of you being in some sense separated from the action. He might not necessarily be saying that the rock is an example of alienation, but admittedly I haven't watched the video listening to his language and watching for that word, so if he actually directly called that alienation, then yeah, that's seems like a clear error based on how you've described alienation.
Right. Yeah, and maybe he has a different definition of alienation, but from what I've read of Marx, this is how he explains it, right? It's basically the loss of agency with respect to particular attributes and the ability to affect outcomes in a certain type of society. So if he's sticking with that definition and he wants to, integrate that into his argument, then all I was saying is I see a way to salvage his position without ending in this absurd type of reductio. Because I think towards the end he was even saying, or after you were muted, he even said, if you bite into a stake or you push a button and that causes galaxies of suffering, that's wrong. But if you purchase a stake and that goes to incentivize a company that's a conglomeration that has operations all across the galaxy, and by purchasing that stake you add to the revenue and maybe they use that to calculate a decision, et cetera, right? You see all the intermediate layers between the action of buying a stake and the final outcome. That would be the way to salvage his argument or his position. But if you're saying that, that doesn't really work with the utilitarian perspective, or what he was saying was different initially in terms of the argument you gave him, then, I don't know about that. But I just think that, go ahead.
Well, I'm happy to explore your position here, how you would try to defend this. But let's just try to get clarity on Vaush's argument and just. If I post this, I just want it to be completely clear to everyone watching that you have to actually abandon Vaush's position to give whatever defense you're about to give here. So okay. Let's just go through these. So this argument here about the one you're talking about that you were interested in, where the conclusion is that if negative utility of action A is negative infinity, action A still isn't immoral. Do you actually think that this is an unsound argument?
I think no. The way it stands, it seems to be sound. Except that, I would accept that, right? Okay. It's a sound argument. Except if you add this concept of alienation to it, then it changes. Now, this is the argument that best summarizes his position, right? I think it's sound.
Yeah. So the idea is, on your view, you'd reject P3. To be clear for anyone watching, P3 isn't supposed to be an actual assertion that utilitarianism is correct. It's supposed to be an argument about someone whose view is utilitarian.
Yeah. No, I got that. Yeah, for sure.
So,
yes.
So yeah, okay. So we understand that given that, well, just to be totally clear for everyone, given that there's some action that is infinitely negative in utility is the only consideration, we're not going to be able to say that, I guess I'll just read through it. But yeah, if there's some action A, for which there's no threshold of negative utility where it becomes immoral, there's no other consideration than utility, then even if action A has infinite negative utility, A still isn't immoral. That's the conditional in the first premise. Then we just get to the consequent being true by affirming these things that Vaush affirms, that there is some action for which there's no threshold. That's the rejection of P2 of my prior, or P1 of my prior argument, and then also that he's a utilitarian. That's just taken from a prior statement he's made. But the important bit is just that you agree that conditional is true. If there's some action where there's just no utility threshold where it becomes negative and there's no consideration other than utility, it's just saying, if there's nothing other than utility that can make the thing negative, and this action doesn't have a utility threshold where it becomes negative, it can just be as negative in terms of utility as you want, and it's not going to be immoral. That's the general idea. Yes. We don't disagree about that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't disagree about that. So I would reject P3, and I think Vaush would too, and that's why, but, he's not, unless he clarifies that, that's what I was building the defense of his position on. And I'm just basing that on stuff he was saying during the exchange.
Now, based on how I've seen Vaush debate, when he ends up with someone who's being really precise and asking technical questions, he sort of tries to what I think he tried to do to me. And you can just assess this for yourself. I'm not gonna necessarily argue this. I'm just gonna state it. He tries to kind of blow past the point at 500 kilometers per hour and add a bunch of hedging to not really encounter exactly what it's saying. So I'm sure that if he heard this, he would just quickly try to be, yeah, of course that's what I'm saying. Yeah, P3 is right. But the important thing, right, is no, you don't get to do that, Vaush. If you want to do that, you need to clearly acknowledge that when you are saying a utilitarian, it's a false statement. You're not a utilitarian, right? So just to be clear, your defense of P3 involves abandoning utilitarianism to get your rejection of P3, not defense of P3. Yeah.
Yes, and I have to say though, I don't know. I don't think it's a contradiction to be a Marxist and a utilitarian. I'm sure you could make a defense for it. I've never heard him make that defense, and from everything I've read, Marx was, vehemently opposed to utilitarianism, at least in his day. And
Yeah.
the other theorists that he went after. So I don't know how Vaush would try to defend being a utilitarian and a Marxist, unless he wants to say that given certain conditions in a capitalist society, which might be an approach he would adopt, you can't actually measure the utility produced by an individual action. So, I mean, if it's just one person, depending on the context and whether alienation is present, you can't actually measure utility. So,
Well,
that's
even
the only way I see it.
so, I agree, but now I have a clearer picture of utilitarianism because there's just a basic doctrine of like what utilitarianism is than I do of Marxism, which is like obviously a complex, like multi-layered, political philosophy. So
And
I'm
I
not.
didn't do the concept, justice. I don't think like even the concept of alienation. It's like complicated, and people have written about it. So even like the summary I gave, I don't think does it full justice. But yeah, it's definitely.
Yeah, the reason I just state that is because I'm not actually holding the view that it's a contradiction to be a Marxist and a utilitarian. It's possible it is if
Right.
there's some proposition entailed by Marxism that I'm not aware of. Like it's kind of obvious what's entailed by utilitarianism. It's just quickly like easily definable normative ethic, but I don't know all the details of Marxism. So if there is some proposition in there somewhere that contradicts utilitarianism, then like so be it. But I don't currently hold the view that it's a contradiction to be a Marxist utilitarian.
No,
Although
neither do I. Yeah.
yeah, it's like the contradiction is just when Vaush says he's a utilitarian, then in order to, kind of like get out of the crazy shit he's gotten himself in with this argument, has to abandon utilitarianism, right? The contradiction is I am a utilitarian and it's not the case I'm a utilitarian. It's not got to do really with Marxism.
Right.
So there's something else I want to say. This is a bit of a side note, but it's worth mentioning just while I'm talking to, some like Marxist guy. There's other really weird things that he has, like consequences he has on his view, like as a result of being a Marxist utilitarian, or at least of making certain statements that are associated with Marxism. Although this Poli Sci PhD I talked to recently told me this statement doesn't come from Marx, it comes from Adorno, but Vaush makes this one statement where he says all commodity purchases under capitalism are unethical. There's no ethical consumption under capitalism. That's how it's usually phrased. I'm sure you've heard that before.
Yeah, I've heard him say that. I've heard him say that.
I'm under the impression that comes from Adorno and not Marx. I don't know if you can speak to that. But
Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, no, Marx never made, I think, any kind of a statement about any purchase under capitalism is unethical. The only thing Marx would have said is that all capitalism is by definition based on exploitation because that's how profit is extracted from workers. But that's very different from saying that every purchase made. I mean, this is looking at it on the consumption side, right? I don't believe he would have ever said, and to my knowledge, and I've read the volumes of Capital, he never said every purchase is unethical at all.
right.
So I'm not sure where Vaush got that. And clearly, I mean, unless you want to take the position that when you make a purchase under capitalism, you're contributing indirectly to, exploitation of labor by, adding to the revenue and profitability of a company. But he himself never made a claim like that, as far as I know. And so I would not agree with that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Ants, but as far as I understand, exploitation on Marxism isn't actually even a value term. It just refers to labor where profit is extracted by a capitalist. It's not like a value statement. It's just referring to that process.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a value judgment at all. He tries to build an economic theory about how capitalism is different from previous modes of economic organization and why it's unique, etc. And he talks about how exploitation is realized under capitalism, but yeah, it's not a.
Yeah.
I mean, he was opposed to it, but when he's explaining it, he's not making a value judgment. But the idea that all consumption under capitalism is unethical, and yeah, that's not something, as far as I know, comes from Marx or anything he said. So,
because people.
yeah, actually, that's another area I disagree with him on, Vaush, when he's trying to say that I think he said buying a child porn is equivalent to buying a T-shirt or something, right? All consumption is unethical, and so yeah, that's something outlandish. I wouldn't.
If he sees this, I wonder if he's going to take your critique to heart or dismiss you as a theory nerd. I really don't know. Either seems plausible, but yeah. So just the fact that the exploitation isn't actually like a normative kind of thing on Marx's view. It's just some description of like a kind of process that happens under capitalism. I mean, it's not actually, there's no entailment there to saying because it's exploitative, it's unethical, right? Exploitative is like this descriptive term. But yeah, so the pickle I was going to point out on Vaush's view is that he makes this statement that all consumption under capitalism is unethical. He makes the statement that he's a utilitarian. But he doesn't have an argument that shows that all consumption decreases utility. Right, so yeah, that's just like, I don't know if you're aware of Xanderhall. Are you aware of Xanderhall?
Sounds familiar.
He's like
but no, not.
He's like Vaush light. He is to Vaush what Vaush is to Destiny. And yeah, maybe not a perfect analogy, but he like kind of came up in Vaush's community as far as I understand. So yeah, like I pointed this out to Xander, and he was very good faith and reasonable. He realized the pickle here, but the pickle you get into if you say that all consumption is unethical and you're utilitarian is you need an argument to show that all consumption decreases utility. And so you kind of have like a trilemma, basically. It's like you can abandon utilitarianism, you can abandon the statement that all consumption is unethical, or you can deliver the argument that shows that all consumption decreases utility. So this is in fact, it's pretty tangential to our conversation about Vaush, but I just wanted to just put that on the table as like just a further like weirdness with his view that seems to derive from like just like not carefully examining his normative ethics and how they relate to these like political statements he makes.
Right. Yeah. No, I would agree. That's a problem, definitely. And as I said, I mean, he makes a number of mistakes about socialization, cultural indoctrination, confuses that with alienation, spatial separation, and then he talks about consumption under capitalism as if that was a primary critique that Marx made of capitalism, when it really wasn't, right? He was focusing on production, and that's what set Marx apart and other classical economists from, modern economists and several other people who were writing during that period. That he was focusing on production as opposed to things like consumption and consumer choices. And he would say there's a dialectical relationship between all of that. It was all unified into a whole. But yeah, I don't know where Vaush got that position from. I don't know if he attributes that to Marx either, and it might just be a position he holds, or he might have gotten it from somewhere else. But it's definitely not something I think is worth defending.
Yeah, I mean the other like leftist poli-sci PhD who I talked to also just like took a shit on that statement. Like it seems like everyone I talk to who's like actually deep in theory stuff just thinks that that's a silly statement. Okay, but let's go back to let's get back to the core of this. So we're talking about these arguments. So we agree actually that this one that we just went over is sound. So then there's the counter argument to Vaush. Now, after all, we get through the stuff about Vaush's position. If you want to like give kind of your sort of position, we can talk about that. But the whole thing with this argument is it's tailored to Vaush. So if we create some like totally different position, it might just not apply anymore.
Okay. Yeah.
So the first premise, I don't think you can object to this first premise of my counter argument by saying that there's a logical impossibility here. Like, do you think that it's impossible for the avoidance of consumption under capitalism to maximize utility?
Impossible for the avoidance of consumption to maximize? No, I don't think it's impossible. There's no contradiction. Right, no. Avoiding certain forms of consumption could maximize utility. Yeah, I can see that theoretically being true.
Yeah, so, because that, if you agree that it's not impossible, and here we're talking, of course, like, you obviously mentioned a contradiction, so you know what I'm talking about, but people throw the word impossible around all the time. Obviously you're not doing that, but yeah, when we say impossible, like, we're looking for a logical impossibility, and it's just, there's no clear reason why we'd say, like, that it's logically impossible. It's a contradiction. There's a contradiction entailed somewhere if you say that avoiding consumption under capitalism maximizes utility. So that wouldn't be a grounds for objecting to P1. So Are
No.
you?
What did he make that no, yeah, I agree. That's not a ground for objecting it. I don't know if he did. Did he do that? I can't tell.
No, he didn't make that, but what I'm kind of open to here is like any objection you can offer to the premises without stepping out of Vaush's position. Like once you say something that does contradict one of his prior statements, then what I'll do is I'll say, if it works, I'll say, okay, that gets you out of the puzzle, but that also requires abandoning Vaush's position. Like you don't seem
Right,
like
and by Vaush's. Yes, sorry.
I just mean this like statements that Vaush is like clearly on the record making. Like if you have to back off of utilitarianism, then like my criteria has been like met here of like you had to abandon Vaush's position to like get the argument to work out. Now just to be clear, I don't think you hold Vaush's position. When I say abandon, I'm talking about when you're like playing devil's advocate for his position or whatever. So
Right.
yeah, so the first premise. He went back and forth on it, but eventually he seemed to like accept it. But so what you want to do is you want to just he eventually rejected the first premise and got this kind of insane reductio. And of course the reductio is logically possible, so there's no escaping the reductio by saying it's like an impossible situation.
Right.
Now, if he So what you want to do now is you're granting that first premise basically, and then we'd like move to the second one, or are you like still objecting on some level?
No, I would grant that first premise in a sense that there's no contradiction. It is possible to avoid consumption under capitalism and add to or maximize utility. Theoretically, that's possible.
Yeah, and it's just what Vaush's view is, unless he wants to back off of it in the way that he did before that got him into this crazy pickle, right? Like if his view is utilitarianism, then like there's got to be some threshold where things of negative utility where things become negative. Like what a utilitarian will generally say is just that there's not some threshold or something. It's just like if utility is negative, we've got an immoral situation or an immoral action or immoral whatever it might be. But I'm granting that he's got some like modified utilitarianism where there's like two different kind of degrees of immorality, and there's like a threshold for the second one, and the second one is like in some sense like more severe or something. Like I'm just allowing some shit like that and still calling it utilitarianism. So okay, we grant this first premise. So yeah, if it turns out that and also funny thing, I assume because you knew what logical impossibility is, you talk about contradiction stuff, you probably are familiar with like sort of basic logic stuff. Funnily enough, Vaush tried to object to this premise by saying that the antecedent is false. But like anyone who's literally just done like, an intro to logic course or just read like the first chapter of a logic book would understand that you can't falsify a conditional statement by rejecting the antecedent. Because a conditional always evaluates to true if the antecedent is false. That's actually if he succeeds there, he actually proves the statement. But that's I'll just assume like he just doesn't know the logic stuff, so it's not like I'm not going to hold it over his head. It's just kind of funny. Okay, so the second premise is just saying, again, this is just another kind of like it's straightforward for a utilitarian, right? If avoiding all commodities produced through capitalism doesn't maximize well-being to a high degree, then it's not the case that we oughtn't buy commodities produced through capitalism. So it's just like, if avoiding them doesn't have this effect of raising utility, there's not a reason we should do it.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. So then the third premise is avoiding meat produced through capitalism maximizes well-being to a high degree.
Yes, I would accept that. I mean, I see no reason to reject the premise, but I think this is where he would say his position. He would want to integrate alienation into the argument somehow, just to make his position clear in terms of what he's saying about utility and disutility.
Well, I mean, see, now this is the only statement here, P3, where it's not like you're kind of pretty free to object how you want, because he hasn't, like, with all the other premises, there's like things I can point to that he's said that like will directly cut against them if you try to sort of like reject them. But with this one, he hasn't really said a lot. Like he could just like reject this, but I mean, I don't really see how you do that. Like, I mean, it sounded like you were granting it, but I mean, clearly, like, the consumption of meat is what's causing the animal holocaust. It's like, I mean, if we don't consume meat, then presumably there's not an incentive for, that holocaust to happen.
Yeah, I'm just basing it on this statement. Again, after you were muted, remember, he made a statement where he said eating the meat itself isn't causing the problem. The meat is already dead, right? The meat's already been produced. The animals have actually been bred or slaughtered for that particular piece of meat. So eating the meat itself isn't actually, the consumption of that meat isn't actually causing something. He said the problem arises that when you buy meat and in conjunction, again, in collaboration or in combination with multiple other purchases, it may incentivize a company to maybe increase meat production or breed more animals into, existence, a miserable existence, then in that sense you could say that the action is problematic or it creates a disutility. But just consuming the meat, that's why I'm just trying to be charitable to what he said or what his position seems to be, and that's why I wavered a little bit on that.
Yeah, it's obvious that it's not the actual eating that causes the economic incentive, it's the buying.
Right.
Yeah, but I mean, unless you think there's a way to resist this premise, it seems pretty straightforward. It seems to me like it's the fact that we're buying it that creates the demand for it. That's why we have the animal holocaust. If people weren't buying it, we wouldn't have the animal holocaust.
Yeah. I think that's true. Yeah, I would accept that. I'm just trying to, it's hard getting in his head and understanding exactly, and he hasn't said too much about that. At least on the 3 exchanges I heard with you. So
it's funny because when, you'll notice that P3 is just the antecedent of P1. So the two of them can be combined into a kind of modus ponens. So he did, when he tried to reject P1, actually reject P3 implicitly, because if you're saying the antecedent of P1 is false, it's not a reason to object to P1. That was him not understanding kind of basic logic. A conditional isn't falsified by the antecedent being false. That actually proves a conditional is true. But that would be him rejecting P3. So I would also say that when you grant P3, I could say right here that my condition is fulfilled, that you're backing off of Vaush's position. But that's we can still go through the rest of the argument, though, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then the next premise, and this is the last premise before the conclusion. The next, it's just the antecedent of premise 2. So it's just going to say, avoiding all commodities produced through capitalism doesn't maximize well-being to a high degree.
Right.
Yeah, you're not sitting here holding the view that we're going to maximize well-being by avoiding all commodity purchases or something.
No, there's no I'd have no theoretical, good reason to say that or to make that type of blanket statement. So, yeah.
And if thing is, Vaush has to basically contradict himself to say that, because if you look at his argument, his premise 2, very top argument there is, it's not the case that we oughtn't buy commodities produced through capitalism, but we oughtn't buy as a utilitarian. All that means, right, is that it generates negative utility to this threshold that he cares about, right? So if that's not the case, right, if it's not the case that we should be avoiding all commodity purchases, what that's saying is that avoiding all commodity purchases doesn't maximize utility above Vaush's threshold, right? So the acceptance of P4 of my counter-argument is actually entailed by the acceptance of P2 of his argument. So, although you're not objecting to P4, if Vaush were to try to object to P4, he'd actually have to contradict one of his prior statements.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. I would agree with that. I don't know if Vaush has never taken the position that would be actually best to avoid all commodity purchases, but it's just not possible or practical to do that, given modern society. Because I know some Marxists take that position.
Now, I try my best to be fair to him. As far as I understand, his view is that it wouldn't be a good idea, because the only way that would be effective, some mass boycott of capitalism, would be if it were a mass boycott, and it's just psychologically not going to happen. Like, people aren't going to get on board with that. It's just not, it's not practical. There's no way to get people to do that. So I think that his view is that, in theory, if people would do it, it would be good. But since that won't happen, since people aren't going to mass boycott capitalism and like live in forests or something, it's just not the case that avoiding commodity purchases, you doing that as like an individual, is going to maximize utility, because you'll never be part of this mass movement that like rejects capitalism by boycotting it.
Right.
As far as I understand, that's his view. Now, that I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that that's like the kind of view he takes, right? In theory, yeah, if everyone boycotted it, we could crash the system, but enough people are just not going to do that, so it's just a stupid strategy. I think that's his view.
Yeah.
And
that's the only way I saw out of that premise, if he had actually at some point said something like that, but I've never heard it, and so...
Yeah,
if he hasn't actually made, that statement.
Yeah, and we'd have to kind of like disambiguate if it would be a good move theoretically for everyone to do versus whether it's actually in reality a move that he thinks will maximize utility, because it's really the latter that we're talking about. Like, it's not the but anyway, I think that I'm being fair to his position there. I mean, someone can correct me if he thinks otherwise, but as far as I understand, his view is, yeah, theoretically if everyone boycotted capitalism, that would crash the system, but you just can't fucking expect people to do that. There's more practical approaches to ending capitalism, so that's what he wants to, try to get people to do.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, but now if we grant all these premises, the conclusion goes through, and P1 of the argument that he affirmed earlier is false. So that's my point, and that's what I would have walked him through if he had have like stayed through the conversation.
Okay, so your position is that if he adds, I'm talking in terms of the formal argument, which shows the reductio on his view, which ended with the reductio you gave him, which he didn't. I don't know if he actually fully answered it, but you're saying there's no way to reject the premises without him abandoning his utilitarian position, and so on those terms, any defense of him would fail.
Well, it's weird to say any defense of him will fail. It's just that if you're going to offer a defense, I just want it to be clear that it requires contradicting his prior statements, right? Because the position... Yeah.
By fail, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sure, yeah, because the whole idea is, I know if he hears some position that like salvages his view here, he's going to hop into it and say that's what he always meant, right? So I just want it to be dead clear that if you reject P3, like that just contradicts his prior statements. Like, you're not a utilitarian anymore. And if you're not a utilitarian, I would just not even, like, this whole argument, like, all these arguments here are tailored to a utilitarian, right? Like, they're all based around the notion that he's a utilitarian, right? Like, premise, like, all of these, literally every premise in the counter-argument uses the words maximize well-being, and, like, even this argument down here below, there's no consideration other than utility, the one that you were focused on. I mean, it's all involving utilitarianism, so... Like, I would not try to give these same arguments if you're going to take a non-utilitarian framework. They just won't even apply to you.
Okay, yeah, I see.
But I'm happy to talk through, like, just generally your position on these things. But, like, I think, is it fair to, like, I don't want to misrepresent you, but is it fair to say that we just agree that this argument down here, the one that you looked at with the infinite negative utility still isn't immoral, that one's sound. The other one, my counter-argument, is sound, and the result of that is just P1 of Vaush's argument is falsified.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Given, I can't get away with this without rejecting utilitarianism, I guess. I don't know how he would do it. I think he would want to make the argument that there's no, he can still be a utilitarian while acknowledging that there's some other standard he would use to, I think, judge certain actions because of this concept of alienation. And again, I don't know what he means by alienation. I don't know if he means cultural indoctrination, socialization, multiple different things that he was, conflating. So I can't even really give that a defense. But I think he would want to defend his utilitarian position by saying, yes, I'm a utilitarian, but with certain actions, I will use this other standard, and that's not necessarily in contradiction with a utilitarian worldview.
I
Now,
think
whether
it
he's,
is.
I don't know enough about, like, philosophy isn't my main domain, so you probably know a lot more about this. But I don't know if you could make that defense about utilitarianism, if you could take that position. But
Well,
I'm guessing that's what he would want to say based on what I've heard him generally talk about.
Well, I mean, just to be clear, I don't know a whole lot of philosophy. I know some like basic level stuff. I'm going to be doing a film minor, but like I'm not some crazy philosophy guy. And I hope you don't feel that to any degree philosophy has been used to like trick or deceive here. Like I try to be very like I understand your training is going to be in like political science or something. So if I start invoking like logic or concepts from philosophy, I'll just define them and be fair about them and make sure we agree.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't think you've been dishonest or manipulative. Even with Marxism, which is my area, I was focused on his economic theories. I've read some of his philosophical theories, his critique of Feuerbach, which I think are interesting, but my focus has really been on his economic theory, and so that's why I wanted to try and give a charitable position, like a view of Vaush's position, looking at Marx's economic theory and the theory of alienation, etc., and how that works. But
we can do that. I mean, and for the record, there are some high-level Marxist debaters in here. Do you know Jack Angstreich?
No, I don't think so.
He's a very good debater. I've struggled to debate that guy before.
Okay.
Did you ever? There's this one video online that got a lot of view. There's a capitalist YouTuber, Academic Agent, and he got in a debate with Jack and just got annihilated. His whole objection, it was a debate on the LTV, which is yet another thing I don't know much about, but I understand.
Value, you mean?
I understand that value on the LTV refers to it's like basically like the it's like some like kind of like abstract unit that's like used to define like equilibrium price or explain equilibrium price. It's like something roughly kind of like that, right?
It's essentially quantities of labor, but it's abstract labor, which can only take place under de-skilling under capitalism. But yeah, it's basically quantities of labor. That's what creates value and therefore surplus value and profit in Marx's view.
And there's some explanation here of like like value there. There's some relation between that and commodity or prices at equilibrium.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, so...
So I don't have to understand all the technical details to point out how hilarious this fail of Academic Agents was. So he was just equivocating on value throughout this whole debate. He was talking about value as like a subjective idea, like, I subjectively place value on this thing or that thing, which is just a completely different use of the term, right? So
that's not Marxist at all. Yeah, I don't know.
So yeah, it's just like 2 hours of Jack, who's just this very high-level Marxist debater, just annihilating this poser on YouTube who's just using, just equivocating throughout the whole debate. Okay, so let's see here. So we agree about all this shit with Vaush's argument. So is there anything that, like, you just want, like, you want to try to give some more, like, charitable construal, or, like, you want to give an anti-vegan case, like, based on Marxism or something like this? Like, I mean, I've gotten what I wanted from this discussion, which was just to point out these arguments are sound. Vaush's argument fails as due to the conclusion of my counter-argument. So I'm glad we agree on that. But if you have things you want to persuade me of, or if you think I've gotten something wrong, or I'm down to hear it.
My position would not be. Well, first of all, I wouldn't look at socialization necessarily, because your main argument was around, if I'm correct, actions and not, any moral judgment about the actor.
Yes.
You avoided that by just saying the actions are immoral. And I think the only way I would be able to do it, if we agree that the outcome, like a sum of actions in a, modern capitalist society where you have atomized actors who are divorced from the means of production, these are all Marxist terms, but divorced from the means of production and also divorced from the production process. So that, consumption has to be mediated through multiple different agents and, conglomerates and all sorts of, other processes, then it becomes difficult to actually point to an action or an individual action and actually say that action was immoral because it actually caused this. I mean, one example I could give you, and I'd be interested in hearing your views on this. If a conglomeration is involved in meat production and, animal raising or breeding and slaughter, but they're also involved in, other divisions. And you purchase, let's say, a steak, and that steak, makes up, that purchase goes to, making up their revenue for, let's say, the year. But they take that revenue and they decide to plow those profits from, say, meat sales into a different division, which has absolutely nothing to do with animal production or meat slaughter. Would you then still say that purchase of the meat was morally problematic or immoral under that view? And I think, this is something Vaush would have tried to get to, but this is just one example of why it becomes difficult when you have alienation in the...
Yeah, so I want to first just say, I'll answer you, of course. I think, I understand roughly what you're saying, and anywhere where it seems like I'm not tracking your concepts in enough detail, because I don't know this territory, you just butt in, make me aware of it. But I understand alienation has to do with, it's basically referring to, the degree of removal between the agent and, I don't know, is it the labor or the outcome of the labor or something? It's you're paying someone and that store is paying someone, and how that store, takes your money and what they decide to spend it on, you're abstracted from that, and then there's some further purchase from there, and there's just this huge chain of production where I don't know how to define it exactly, but the idea is just you're really far removed from the consequence at the other end.
That's actually a very good summary for someone who's not a specialist in Marxism. That's actually, it's close to, that's pretty much how I would have defined alienation. So that is what I'm talking about, right? Okay. And so that's one example of it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm also inclined to be forgiving of individuals to some degree because of, just alienation. I understand that, but I don't think... Okay, wait, I should answer your question before I go off. So you asked me, can you just remind me the exact question?
Right. There's a conglomeration that's involved in production, let's say, right? And you purchase a stake that goes to their annual revenue, and they take the revenue from that purchase and all their other purchases, but they decide to take the profits from meat, and put it into something else, expand a different division, and not actually use it for further animal breeding or... in that scenario, can you say the action is purchasing the steak is still morally problematic? Yeah.
So here's my answer. No, I wouldn't. And just for the record, there's many other situations like this. I actually think it's not unethical if a business has, if they are going out of business and selling off their stock, so you're not creating any further demand to buy the meat from that business. I think you could ethically buy meat in that situation, and there's other cases we create. But no, I wouldn't say it's immoral because you're not actually creating demand for the animal product. But what I would say is that we have to have kind of a heuristic here, because we don't really know. We don't have access to, because of alienation, obviously, we don't have access to the inner workings of, these corporations, the whole production chain, what your money ultimately ends up going to. So we just have to apply a heuristic here to try to get our money into the right place, and veganism is that heuristic. So no, that action turns out actually not being immoral, but generally speaking, money put into meat is going to tend to result in money going into the creation of more meat. There's a stable kind of general relation there, and that stable general relation is the basis for veganism as a heuristic.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So in a sense, your argument would be because of the degree of alienation, you can't know, and since there's a tendency to purchase that purchases from meat will actually go to expanding those operations, it's best to refrain from purchasing meat under these conditions.
There's exactly. There's just a high probability that it's immoral. There's an epistemic barrier there to you because of alienation, but you still nonetheless have to make a decision, and you want to do it based on, some kind of reasonable heuristic. And we can just apply this anywhere. Buying child porn. It is possible that you buy a bunch of child porn, and then the person who sells you the child porn on the dark web or whatever is you know what, I'm going to go into selling I don't know, bird grain or just something totally harmless, and it turns out none of the money you put into child porn actually resulted in the creation of any more child porn. Maybe it even gave this guy enough money to get the fuck out of the business, and there's less child porn in the world as a result of you buying child porn. That's all possible. But there's a very safe general assumption that when you buy child porn, the money is going to go into the production of more child porn or some amount of that money. So that's the basis for avoiding buying it. Not that it's always going to actually come out like negative in terms of utility or whatever other kind of moral thing we're concerned with to buy the child porn.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's, I think, an example Vaush gave, which I just found, outlandish when he said he would actually say buying a t-shirt is equivalent to buying child porn.
Oh, it's insane.
Yeah, it's just so. Mm-hmm.
Can I ask you another question?
Yeah, sure.
Because, and I don't, I mean, if you have more, you can keep, I'll humor all of your questions. I'm always happy to take, like, you know, if I've got an error, I want to find it. And I like hearing people's views, especially if they know about the topic in detail. But yeah, so when I was talking to this other, well, I guess you said your political economy PhD, this is Poli Sci PhD. The discussion's going up on my channel in a bit. You might like it. She's like a kind of leftist, anti-capitalist type, so maybe similar sensibilities to you to some degree. We got into a conversation about, we got briefly into this topic about, was it about the child porn or whatever? I don't fucking remember. But look, just let me. What was I gonna say? Buying child porn. Give me a second. I'll remember.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck it. Oh yeah. So just this notion that everything, oh yeah. So here's one. It's a little removed from that, but so for example, buying from a sweatshop. Here's one that we talk about. Vegans get really tripped up on this, and they think it's like very wrong to buy from a sweatshop. And I think that there's like a very kind of stable case here that like someone with like leftist or like anti-capitalist sensibilities could make, which is just that like, yeah, we can all agree that a sweatshop is a suboptimal state of affairs. Like no one wants there to be sweatshops. But there's a distinction between saying that that state of affairs is suboptimal and saying that buying from it is suboptimal. Because when you talk about buying from it, you have to talk about what is the alternative if you don't buy from it. And it's like, well, there's this shitty situation that people are in. People tend to work the best jobs that they have access to. If you defund it, presumably those people are just going to be in an even worse situation, which is a shitty state of affairs. But it does seriously make me go, well, what exactly is the problem with buying from the sweatshop? A boycott in this instance makes things worse.
Yeah, no, I would agree. That's why my critiques of these type of it stays away from actually just consumption habits in general. I mean, I'm not opposed to somebody refraining from consuming certain products or purchasing them on principle, but to say that not doing it or doing it is somehow contributing to this kind of these type of conditions, because in the case of sweatshops, I agree. It takes things like labor organizing. It takes things like lobbying for different policies within the country that's hosting those sweatshops. All those type of different activities, and so focusing on consumption in that fashion, with not buying iPhones made in China, etc., doesn't really actually get to the problem. Is what I would like. My response to that is just I'm production centered. Sure. When it comes to the type of Marxist analysis I focus on. And that's actually something else I wanted to ask you about veganism, because I know there's some other political economists. I don't know if you know that she has a YouTube channel, Mexi, at all.
Yeah, I have some issues with Mexi, although I'd be happy to talk to her. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just, I like her political economy posts or videos. Generally, I don't support a lot of her. I mean, her discussion with Vaush was, I don't think she's really a good debater, and I don't generally agree with a lot of the other things she says. But on political economy, that analysis, but she takes the position that it has to be, veganism needs to, the solution to meat production has to come from the production side, and top-down legislation and just general liberation through activism, as opposed to refraining from consuming meat products. So I mean, it's a similar argument that you could make with things like sweatshops and purchasing iPhones in China, that this refraining from consumption, I mean, it might be good in terms of taking a principled stand, but if you're actually trying to affect change, it's not actually the the direction to go in. But so I think you would disagree with that.
I would take a middle ground, actually. So I think that there's a disanalogy between the vegan issue and the sweatshop issue. Before talking about whether boycotting is like effective or not, just spelling out what the disanalogy is. The disanalogy is that in the sweatshop case, we're just talking about the workers. So the only thing we're looking at is what makes it better for the workers, buying from this place or boycotting it. and there's not a case that boycotting it makes it better for the workers. In the case of the animal holocaust, it is different, though, because it's not just the workers, it's the Holocaust victims, right? So when you consider that, then you realize to whatever degree you boycott, there will be less victims. So that's, I think that's actually like a disanalogy. And I want to say one other thing. So where I'm sympathetic to what you're saying, though, is that I don't think that the ideal solution here is consumption-based. Now, I think that there is actually one possibility here, which is lab meat. If it becomes just cheaper and, it's like cheaper, healthier, and we get rid of the ick factor. Like right now people think lab, weird, gross, but once the marketing kicks in and it's like, they start marketing themselves by talking about like how disgusting this meat that like had hair and like lived in feces and stuff is, and now theirs is all clean, and it just becomes the norm. I think that actually could result in like such a big shift in consumption. Like once it's way cheaper to produce the stuff, especially, that could result in like a scale of consumption shift that might be like really meaningful. But just the vegan movement as it is doesn't seem to be doing, like, it's not doing enough. Like, it's doing something, clearly. I mean, I assume that the numbers would be even worse if it weren't for, the millions of people living vegan. But yeah, so where I'm sympathetic here is that I tend to think that the ideal approach is kind of like multi-pronged. So I think that we want like top-down action. Like if we could make meat illegal, I would want to make it illegal. And counter-arguments to that are really stupid. Oh, black market for meat, though. Okay, does anyone say black market for murder or black market for rape or something like this? Like, there's not going to be a black market on the scale that there's, the current market. And also, since when is that like an excuse to keep something legal? So I support like top-down legal action, lobbying, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, so I guess I don't need to really say more than that. I would want that kind of approach taken simultaneously with a consumption-based approach. And the consumption part, it's not that the consumption part is necessarily, like, I could grant, just for the sake of argument, say we had like a little telescope into the future or something, and we find out that, like, yeah, even when the lab meat comes around, like, there's just not that big a shift in consumption habits, and for whatever reason, like, people just keep buying the stuff, and it's just not enough to do the trick. Like, let's just grant that that's all the case. I still think that you have an individual moral obligation, not because of the scale of your impact on the big problem, but just because it's important not to contribute the little bit you are. So that's not just like an aesthetic stance or something like this, where it's like, just on principle you don't contribute, which is kind of one thing you said there. That voice wasn't mocking you, it's mocking the idea of someone who would actually like take that position, because it sounds really like silly, obviously. But the idea is just like, by analogy to rape, like, you personally not raping is not going to do much on the global rape numbers, right? Like, you're not going to really have much of an effect. It still remains the case that you oughtn't rape, right? Like, even if your rape just adds like a tick or two to the overall numbers, you still shouldn't be doing it. So that's like the kind of view I take. Multi-pronged approach is effective, and you still have a moral obligation not to contribute the small amount that you contribute.
Right. I mean, again, with that type of an example, I guess my objection would, the analogy would be, again, you've removed alienation in that sense, right? I mean, going out and actually taking a knife and slitting a hog's throat is one thing that's, separate from, again, all these intermediate layers that actually filter through action and outcome in this type of environment, or in terms of how meat is produced now. But yeah, generally I understand what the position is, and it's why it's separate from outcome. What I would actually be interested in knowing, I think Sam Harris said this to you when you asked him a question, and I don't know if you've ever responded to it, but he actually said if we got to the point where breeding animals into existence was a net good for them, so factory farming is done, it's a wonderful, I suppose he imagines, beautiful life that they live free of suffering, predation, and then at the end, the price for that is that they're slaughtered and they provide meat. As somebody who values a net good for animals, could you be against that? I think is how he phrased it.
Yeah, so the answer here is my answer is no, unless it's really high well-being, but I can also give a bit of framing there. So you understand what like utilitarianism is, obviously, and do you understand kind of what deontology is?
That's like about that's rule based, isn't it? I mean, an action is you should follow.
Exactly.
Yeah, morality is based on. Yeah, okay.
So my position is what I'm most friendly to. I don't really settle on a normative ethic. Like if there's a counterexample, I'll just say, oh, that's fine. But the position out there that seems to most accurately capture my values, and which I'm not currently aware of a counterexample to, is called threshold deontology. So that's like the kind of view where there are these deontic concerns, and they might be things like, you know, maybe it's right to life, maybe it's right to bodily autonomy or freedom or some kind of thing like this. There are like some deontological concerns like rights, but they can be outscaled by utility. So if we talk about the trolley, where it's like there's a trolley, it's going to hit 5 people, you can flip the switch and hit 1. The standard kind of responses you get from a utilitarian and a deontologist. The utilitarian says flip the switch, that's going to be better for utility. The deontologist says don't flip the switch because then you are actively causing the murder of 1 person. So the kind of position that a threshold deontologist is going to take is no, it's not ethical when the trade-off is low. So, you know, maybe like 1 life for 2 lives, but at some point it becomes high enough that it would be ethical to do it. So, like, say that it's 1 person on the one side of the trolley and 8 trillion on the other side. Yes, I say flip the switch. So, just to answer your question more precisely, my answer is going to be no if those animals are experiencing lives that are, like, you know, somewhat good, but we're still, like, you know, like murdering them. But once you make their lives really good, at some point I'd have to say yes, and I would take the same view for humans. Do you object to that or take a different view?
With respect to animals, no. I mean, I would take a similar view. If you could breed them into existence and they had a wonderful life free from predation, and then at the end, that the final result was, or the sacrifice that's made is that they're slaughtered or sacrificed for for meat consumption, I'd be in favor of that. Obviously, that's not happening under factory farming. But I mean, it does raise one issue that I think is interesting, in that veganism in the current context, you know, cutting back on consumption, what it's leading to is fewer animals are bred into a miserable existence, but it won't stop the animals that have already been bred from actually being slaughtered, right? Via reaching out to new markets, or, you know, increasing population growth and just essentially marketing operations by these corporations. The ones that have been bred into existence will, you know, in the final analysis, be slaughtered for food. So, I mean, unless, and I know veganism has led to a reduction in the animals that have been bred into existence, but unless you were, you know, take a specific anti-natalist view, that's the issue I have with veganism in this type of context, and why I was sympathetic a little bit to, you know, Vaush's view, or what I took to be his view.
See, I don't know if veganism has actually resulted in a reduction in the sense of there are less animals being bred. I think that I might be wrong here, I need to look at the data, but I'm under the impression that the number is actually still increasing year by year. But that doesn't mean that veganism isn't having an effect. There's a lot of vegans who make a really sketchy inference here, who go, the numbers are still going up, therefore veganism is having no effect. But that's like saying if you put a boulder in front of a car that's careening at a bunch of people, and, you know, it slows the car down, but it still plows through, you know, a certain amount of them, and because it's accelerating, it's still able to pick up speed and start killing more and more people per second, that the boulder isn't having any effect. It's like, well, I mean, it would be killing even more people if the boulder weren't there. So just a little tiny correction, I mean, if it's even a correction, if it is the case that the numbers are still going up of animals bred per year, then veganism isn't actually having the effect of making the number go down. It's just causing the number to be not as high as it would be. But yeah, what was I going to say to your point? Oh yeah, with the logic of the larder stuff, that argument's called logic of the larder. When you, would you take the view that it would be ethical to, like, murder these animals if the differential between them not existing and them existing and getting murdered were equivalent to, like, 1 sip on a can of Coke?
No.
Yeah, but then at some point, if it's like, you know, the differential between them existing and getting murdered at the end, or not existing at all, is equivalent to, like, you know, like trillions of, like, generally like very happy lives or something, then you say yes.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds like a threshold deontic position. Theoretically, it could be justified on other ethics, but it sounds threshold deontic. That's the kind of view I take. And presumably you take the same view with humans, right? Like, if we can farm humans and murder them, and by doing that we're able to increase utility, like, just a tiny bit, probably not justified. You probably need to be able to really raise utility to, like, quite a degree to justify treating humans like that. Or do you take a full-on deontic view with humans where it would never be justified?
I think more of the latter. I would lean towards more of the latter. I mean, are humans living out their entire, full lives in this scenario, or is it a lovely life up until the age of 30 and then it's cut short?
It's whatever it is with animals. With animals, are you talking about them living their full lives? Like, I'm just keeping the situations parallel.
Okay. Yeah, full lives.
Yeah, so humans get a full life, they get slaughtered at, like 90 or something.
No, I think I would take the principle that that's wrong.
So
even in that scenario.
Then the question would be, what is it that's true of the animals that, if true of the humans, would cause you to take the same kind of view that you take with the animals?
Right. So this is name the trait, correct?
Yeah. Right.
We're running. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, you don't have to have I understand you're literally just getting this, like, logic of the larder question thrown back at you and you've never thought about it, so I'm not expecting a fucking detailed response, but, like, just spitballing, like, do you think there's some difference there?
Yeah. Yeah, I have thought about it, and it's similar to marginal cases, correct?
I would put them in the same family. Yeah. There's, like, a specific kind of formalization to name the trait, but yeah, they're like, I put that all in the same family.
Okay, yeah, and I have looked at that, and I know there have been counter arguments to that, and without disagreeing necessarily taking one position, I think, with name the trait, if I were to say, or if somebody were to say that, I don't know, let's say the relevant traits are X and Y, and that's intellectual abstract reasoning, and let's say language capacity based on universal grammar, as the norm of a particular species, and that norm is based on heritable traits that have been established through, let's say, an evolutionary process. I don't know, wouldn't the reductio in that case just end up stating a tautology in a sense? Because then if you, run the hypothetical on me, it would just seem that you'd be saying that humans, if they belong to a species which lacked these traits and that was the norm, it would be okay to treat them like animals. In other words, if they were like animals in all of the morally relevant areas that I've identified, then it would be okay to treat them like farm animals.
I don't see how it's a tautology, but that would be the kind of reductio, yeah. So the idea is, like, so you said it's some kind of, like, abstract thinking ability or something, like, roughly like that. If it's more specific than that and it needs to be dialed in, then we can talk about that. And also, like, language based on universal grammar. So say that we just have... say that there are no more intelligent people, it's just a species of disabled people. Are those the kind of beings that it would not be a problem for them to be raised, given a good life, and then slaughtered at the end?
Yeah, I guess this sounds, in a sense, probably atrocious, but if you give me the reduction where you say you have a group of beings that belong to a species where those traits are absent, and the absence of those traits has been established through a norm, or the norm of that absence has been established through evolution. And by disability, I take it to mean sufficiently disabled. We're talking disabled to the point where, they resemble, let's say, actual farm animals. Then
they're just disabled to the point that they don't have those features. They're just disabled to the point that they're not speaking, like you said, no language, and they're not doing any, like, abstract reasoning or whatever it was.
Right. Yeah.
And keep in mind here, this situation, like, we're just running this on when you would start taking a threshold deontic view instead of a full-on deontic view with humans. So the thing you get to here is, like, if we have disabled humans who are, we just have, like, where there aren't like intelligent members of the species, that it would would be ethical to treat them in the same kind of way as you're advocating treating animals. That's, like, the idea.
Right. And that norm has been established through evolution, right? So that's how that species.
Like, keep in mind, we're not running this like I normally run name the trait, where the reductio is supposed to be a bad thing. In this case, like, I'm hoping that you agree with the reductio, because I take the reductio, right? Like, I take a threshold deontic view towards humans and animals. It's when you tried to take the full deontic view towards humans that it looks like a little crazy.
No, I would accept that reductio that you put it. That's the consistent thing.
And just to be clear, with humans who aren't like that, even if we can generate infinite well-being by giving them good lives and then killing them at the end, you still, even though infinite well-being outweighs all of cancer, AIDS, like everything, still not ethical? Because that does seem pretty wacky to me. It seems like logic of the larder is...
You're right. Infinite well-being. Yeah, no, I would have to accept that then.
Yeah, so it's not even a position we have to run name the trait on, because you hold the same view for humans and animals. I guess maybe before running name the trait, to show that you would take the threshold deontic view with people once they have certain features, I should have just made the situation way more clear that, like, we're talking infinite well-being here, and then you take the position even with normal humans, which I do too. I think you'd have to seem pretty crazy not to. Like, I mean, who doesn't want infinite well-being? Like, if you gotta murder people to get infinite well-being, I mean, seems ethical to me, personally. So I just say that to kind of, like, diffuse the idea that, like, it's really crazy to, like, bite the bullet there on, like, treating animals like that at some point. So yeah, we take the same view, which is a threshold deontic view. Not ethical to farm animals or humans, if they have good lives where they're just barely having a good life. It's like just a bit better than if they weren't around. But once we hit some threshold, I'm sure the threshold isn't at infinity, but it's somewhere. You know, once we hit some threshold, then we both kind of reluctantly go like, okay, like, it's kind of annoying that we have to, like, murder people, but yeah, of course, at some point it's going to become fine if there's enough well-being generated by it.
Right. Yeah, I would accept that.
Yeah.
So if name the trait, I just wanted to ask, if you're running it so that the reductio is actually, you know, an absurd reductio, where it actually highlights some kind of, sociopathy, and somebody were to run that, you know, give those traits that I specified.
Yeah, disabled Holocaust would be the reductio.
Yeah, right. But I mean, the reason I said tautology is it seems if I gave those traits and then said they were established, they're hereditary or they're heritable, and that's been established through a long evolutionary process, then it would seem that the reductio is if human beings, hypothetically, in some, I don't know, possible world, through evolution, belong to a species where they resembled animals or farm animals in all the morally relevant ways, would it then be justifiable to treat them like farm animals, right? In that hypothetical, or in that scenario, aren't you simply, you know, saying a species, like a group of beings evolved as part of the species, and that species essentially is, or it resembles, the species that are, you know, treated or, you know, bred into existence and used for meat.
I don't understand exactly how you're using the word tautology, because sometimes when someone says tautology, the idea is that you're like saying something that's kind of vacuous. But, like, just by analogy, say that you made a statement like, if, you know, for all x, if x is a rock, I like x. And I'm like, okay, you know, what about a rock with, like, big fangs that, like, tries to, like, rip you apart or something? And then you say, yeah, it's a rock, I like it. It's like, I guess there's maybe a sense that you could say there's something tautological going on, because it's like you're just affirming what you said before. If it's a rock, I like it, and this is a rock, so I like it. Like, you could say that there's something tautological there, but the whole idea is a lot of people are going to have an impulse to contradict their prior statement, and agreeing with their prior statement under those conditions is going to seem wacky to a lot of people. I mean, if you say you like the rock that's going to rip you apart or something like that, then that looks weird. So I don't see how it's a criticism to be like, oh, it's a tautology, because sure, we can say like...
By tautology, I just meant, so I was using it to mean it becomes true by definition. I mean, if I give this trait stack and then I say, you give a hypothetical scenario where human beings, you know, hypothetically in some scenario resemble farm animals, essentially are farm animals because they've evolved this way, then yes, it would be, moral under that view to treat them like farm animals. I just sort of meant, you know...
Yeah, like there's a sense that all deductively valid arguments are tautologies, right? Like if you have like modus ponens, like P implies Q, P therefore Q. If you make that into a WFF, like you take it and you go P implies Q and P, put that all in brackets, and you say implies Q, and you put that into a truth table generator for well-formed formulas, that's going to come out true in every possible world, right? So it's not really like a problem, because it's like all deductively valid arguments are tautologies in that sense. So if we framed what you're saying like an argument, it's just like for all x, if x has like these characteristics, then it's okay to murder x. You know, here is an x that has these characteristics, therefore it's okay to murder that. If we formalize that and put it into a WFF generator, yeah, it's going to come out true in all possible worlds. But calling that a tautology is not really like a shot against it any more than it would be a shot against like modus ponens or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, it's just like all deductively valid arguments, if you make them into a WFF by conjoining the premises and then implying the conclusion, are going to be tautologies.
Right. Yeah, no. I've heard a few of your debates where you run it, and when people either contradict themselves or don't accept the the logical outcome. I find it odd because.
Well, yeah, because the outcome's entailed by what they said. So, but the thing is, lots of people haven't really thought it through, right? Like, if you really do take the view that, if like we look at a disabled person, right, and it's like, okay, if say that everyone were like that, then it's just fine to Holocaust them. It's like if you really take that view, then okay, I'm not gonna say it's inconsistent. I think that a lot of people, at least anyone who's constituted like me, will find that a pretty unpalatable view. But yeah, I'm not going to tell you that you're inconsistent for holding it. All that Name the Trait really does is it teases out what your view ultimately is saying, like how you're making the moral separation, and then people who are watching can just decide for themselves if it aligns with their ethics or not. Someone like me is going to look at that and go, "Oh no."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. It's just. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've seen a few of those debates, and I understand. Usually, the way you give the reductio is that the beings physically resemble human beings, because few people give physical appearance, and I think that's psychologically, jarring for the most part when you get that conclusion. And so people backtrack on that a little bit, at least.
Yeah, well, a lot of people have vegan sensibilities, but just haven't realized it, and they can realize it if you do sort of consistency testing stuff like this. Someone like you, if you really do believe this view, which like I do kind of just want to make sure, like if you look in general, like if you see someone like this, that's Brie, right? Like you really take the view that if we just had like a planet full of Brie, it would just be fine for them to be, like just holocausted?
Brie? What do you mean by Brie?
There's, in general chat, there's a picture of Brie. Well, it's a video.
Okay.
Are you able to navigate to that?
Yeah, I'm just a little reluctant to do it because I might get thrown out of this chat. I put on my Android again.
You have to touch the general that has a hashtag beside it, not a microphone beside it. The one with the microphone is the voice channel. The one with the hashtag is the text channel. I can ping you in it, so you'll see a little ping. You see that? Should be a little red 1 kind of thing.
Yeah, it says like 2 in red. Should I just?
Yeah, you just go over to that. If you leave the channel, I'll drag you back.
And under general?
Yep.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So the question is like, it's not a gotcha. Like if you really feel comfortable killing people like Brie, I'm not going to tell you your position's inconsistent. But like, you really think if there's a planet of people like that, which by the way, going to Brie is overshooting animals by a bit. Like animals can do more than Brie, but you really think if there's a planet of people like Brie, it's just fine to Holocaust?
I mean, the morally consistent position is that, let's say, I don't know, if this is above the sentience or capacity, intellectual or cognitive capacity of, say, a pig, which is has the intelligence.
A pig can do more than Brie can do.
Yeah. So if you had a hypothetical scenario where there was a species like Brie, and every single member of that species evolved in this fashion, to have these traits or to have this level of cognitive or intellectual capacity in the absence of language as a universal grammar. I mean, it's difficult, but just because, they look like Homo sapiens, and so looking at a human being, you have that type of psychological or evolutionary attachment or bond with the Homo sapien. But the moral position, the morally consistent position would have to be, I think, if you're okay with what's happening with animals now or how they're bred and how they're killed now, would have to be to bite the bullet on that.
Well, it doesn't. There's morally consistent positions with different entailments than that, but the morally consistent entailment of what you put forward as the traits that differentiate humans from animals ethically in the context of the Holocaust, that is the consistent extension of your position. Now, I always, when I bring this up, people sometimes hard commit to the view just because they're like, yeah, it would be consistent. And I almost hear you hesitating a bit and then justifying the hesitation as just like an evolutionary response and saying it would be the consistent position. But just in all honesty, do you really look at someone like that and feel comfortable with the thought of her being like stabbed in the throat?
No, comfortable with it, no, but I'm not comfortable with what's happening with pigs either, or put into gas chambers. That's not something I'm comfortable with, right?
So no, I agree, but this, this is fine. But then you kind of have sensibilities that are like me to some degree, right? So unless you're gonna adopt like some kind of like realist moral position and say there's some kind of like distinction between what you're like comfortable with and what's moral or something like that, like, if you're just saying no, like I don't like this for Brie, and I don't like. Sorry, I was just going to say, if you're like, I don't like this for Brie and I don't like it for animals, then of course I'm not going to say that's an inconsistent position. But that's inconsistent in the good direction, Ants. The inconsistent in the bad direction is it's fine to kill the pigs and it's fine to stab Brie. The consistent in the good direction is it's wrong to kill both. And if you take that position, that's just why you should be vegan.
Right. Yeah, no, I understand that. I suppose I think it is, possible to say you're uncomfortable with something, but it's not morally problematic, right? I don't think...
It'll get into meta-ethics. What do you mean by moral? It depends on your view. If the things are like the same on your view, like all moral means to you is something about your level of comfort or like approval or something, then it wouldn't be possible to say that one is moral and you don't feel comfortable. But if you take a view of morality, this is going to get into like meta-ethics basically, but if you take a view where it means something else to say it's moral than to say like you approve or you're comfortable or something like that, then you can have one but not the other. But if you do that, then I have to ask you for like the argument for that and what you mean by like moral and stuff like this.
Well, you can just be socialized into thinking that something is, be uncomfortable with something because you've been socialized into thinking that there's something, generally problematic with it, or there's something, I don't know, out of the ordinary with it, but you can intellectually take the position that, that socialization was wrong and there's nothing necessarily morally wrong with it, like with the act. Like, I don't know, an example could be homosexual sex, right? If you think about it, you've been socialized to think that it's generally, I don't know, sense uncomfortable for you, right, to envision, you can take that position and still realize there's nothing wrong with like morally with homosexuality. Is all I make sense.
Whether that is something you can do actually depends on whether your kind of like sensibilities and what's moral are referring to distinct things. So it gets into meta-ethics because it's talking about like what do moral statements refer to. So like,
right.
I don't know if you want to go way down this road, and obviously, again, I know your area is not Phil, but like, what do you think it means to say that something is moral?
That I can actually condemn something or, not condemn it. I take the view that it's just morality is, subjective, necessarily in the sense that you can't apply positivist, claims. There's not something empirical out there that you can verify physically or measure in any distinct fashion. But when I say I find something morally objectionable, I would actually just say I would not want that to happen, or I think there's something problematic or wrong with it, so that it would be better off if it didn't happen, versus if I were to say I'm just uncomfortable with something. It could be for any number of psychological reasons.
Okay, well let's work with that understanding of what it means to say something is moral, which is moral or immoral, which is just you would want it to happen versus you wouldn't want it to happen. Which I'm fine with. That's like basically the kind of construal I take. It's just about your desires.
Right.
It sounded, though, like you would not want Bree to be stabbed, unless I misunderstood you.
I would not, in this reality, first of all, I mean, in this reality where he's a member of a species where the norm is actually, is to possess the traits that I specified, then I think in this reality, yes, it would be morally wrong. If you're giving me the hypothetical that in some scenario, you have members of a species that have evolved through evolutionary processes, and they've evolved where those traits are absent, and the absence of those traits I specified is actually the norm, then...
But the thing is,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's just I understand like what you want to do. You want to find a way to say like, once we make it different enough, I accept it. But it's like, no matter how many layers of abstraction or alienation. No, I'm just kidding. I just wanted to misuse alienation to trigger you. It's like no matter how many layers of abstraction you try to put in there, you're just talking about Bree, and you're just talking about a bunch of people who are like Bree. So I mean. It's just like, honestly, the read I get when I'm talking to you is that you don't like it. If you want, like, it sounds almost like you're trying to convince yourself that you would be okay with it, to be, like, totally honest.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I mean, I wouldn't like it, but I don't like generally what's happening to, well, not generally, I don't like
me either,
what's happening to pigs. I mean, a lot of that has to do with the method. I mean, but I don't know what is your position on, hunting as part of an ecosystem, the Aboriginal form of, meat.
Well, one second.
Because I don't know necessarily, yeah.
But that's, okay, we can talk about that, but that's just, we're so close to agreement here, because what we did was initially you said you wouldn't be comfortable, but it would be moral. But then we got into meta-ethics, and it's like, well, all you mean by immoral or moral is you would want it to happen. And it turns out you actually wouldn't want it to happen either. So it's still, even by the separation you gave between moral and comfortable, it's still not moral. So, and you said you don't like it for pigs either. So I won't charge you with inconsistency. Of course that's consistent, but again, that's consistent in the good direction. That's consistent in the direction that would just lead you to be vegan. If you want to ask about Aboriginals now or something, you can, but I'd also just point out, like, you're not in that situation. No,
I'm not, and that's why I'm saying, I absolutely am in favor of trying to, eliminate factory farming as far as possible. And if, I'm a progressive, I would say, I think Marxism is quite useful as an analytical tool, as an economic analytical tool, but, in the abstract, the type of society he envisioned, where you do away with inequality and you reduce suffering through economic exploitation, all these other means. I mean, if there was a way to a government to implement or to legislate, a progressive government, say like an elimination of factory farming, and that meant I would have to at least people would have to reduce meat consumption. I mean, I'd be all for that. I mean, for environmental reasons and just because of animal suffering. Now, if you're asking me though, the reason I brought up Aboriginal, are you say if I'm going to say it's wrong on principle to always. Sure.
Just because that's going to slightly change the topic. I'm fine to talk about that, but I just want to ask something about what you just said with legislating, because again, like sometimes I feel like, I'm just going to be totally honest. Sometimes I feel like a little awkward talking about this with people, because it's like first of all, you came in here to talk about Vaush's thing, not about fucking getting into your own like views and what you want to do and what your ethics are. So you can back out of the conversation if you want. But sometimes I feel a bit weird, because I feel like I need to like make the person realize like psychological like defenses almost, and I hate, like, it feels condescending and obnoxious to psychologize someone, but like I just hear that kind of response so much, where it's like, well, like, yeah, we need to do something top down, but all that really is like, okay, I do want to say this is horrible and I do want something to happen about it, I just don't want to do anything about it. Like, would you deny that that's what you're doing, or would you say that is kind of what you're doing?
I would say it is partially. In this case, and this is one area where I actually do generally agree with Vaush's position that consumption, or actually, eliminating consumption or reducing consumption in a certain context, or again, you have things brought about through a certain form of economic organization, isn't necessarily going to make the type of impact that's necessary to reduce that type of suffering. But if you did it on the production side, then I could get on board with that. So I just don't know, and especially in the context of alienation, of this specialization, separation of divisions of labor, etc. I really don't know that consumption is the solution, and I don't know if it's necessarily fair to point to individual consumption as the general root of the actual problem.
I think there's a misunderstanding.
Yeah, in many ways.
There's a misunderstanding of my position there, though, because I cleared this up earlier, but we did kind of like breeze past it, so I didn't probably like get highlighted enough. But like, I don't take the view that like the whole solution is about consumption. Like, on my view, there is an individual responsibility to not support this stuff, but the solution, I think, is going to be multi-pronged. Like, I think that we want to legislate from the top down. If there's some kind of production change or something like that, you know, I'm not sold on like communism or socialism. It might just be from lack of looking into it, but you know, if like maybe a change like that is something that would that I could be convinced of, although I'm not sure about that. But like, the point is, I support a multi-pronged approach. I support like lobbying, I support, you know, just top-down legislation, and I support individual action. And I would just ask you something, and we can go to the Aboriginals. I'm not dodging the Aboriginals. I'm happy to talk about that, but it's just, I want to just hash this out. And just for the record, my whole thing on the Aboriginals is like, I take the view that like they need to like just either find some way to live vegan, or they have to like move, basically. And we can talk about that. That's a bit controversial, but like, I would just run name the trade with humans. If they were holocausting humans, what would we say? We would say that, you know, they have to stop that. It doesn't matter if it's their tradition, blah, blah, blah. But okay, we'll go to that in a second though. All I was going to say with the top-down consumption stuff is, like, if we take another example, though, like murdering humans, right? We have legislation against it. The top-down action has been done. It is illegal in our society to murder someone. But you still, nonetheless, take a position that you shouldn't murder someone. And I have a feeling that that position wouldn't change if it were legal to murder people.
Correct. That's correct. Yeah, absolutely. So this is like...
Why wouldn't it just be the same with animals? Why is it with animals that you only care about the top-down thing? You wouldn't just say, yeah, I mean, in the same way, like, I support the top-down thing. I have this, like, economic analysis, which I agree with, by the way, which says that to really address the problem effectively, we need to do something top-down. But yeah, I still have an individual responsibility here, just like I do with humans, and just like I would say I do with humans, even if it were legal to murder people.
Right. So there's two issues there. Number one, when you're talking about directly going out and murdering someone, then that's again, you know, eliminating. I know we've like kind of beat this horse.
Sorry, I'll change it. I'll change it to. I'll just. I don't just to cut that off, and just I'll adjust the hypothetical so you don't even have to give that. Let's talk about paying someone to murder a person. And if you're going to talk about the layers of abstraction, I mean, you'd have to say by analogy it's wrong to like pay just a family farmer for their turkey or something like that. So there's not that many layers.
You ran this. Okay, so you ran this hypothetical in one of your discussions with Vaush, where you said, suppose you were actually, you know, there was an industry producing, I don't know, meat from, you know, the breast or the flesh of lesbians, trans people, all the people he cares about, and it's done under the same conditions. It's, you know, sold or packaged and exchanged under the same conditions that meat consumption is. And he actually bit the bullet on that and said, if you have this degree of alienation, he would actually accept that in this context. I wouldn't necessarily. So for me, it's two things. Number one, I do think there's a substantive difference with humans and animals. So we just did run the trade, and that's why I would make that type of a distinction between industries.
But it didn't work out, though. You ended up, in the end, taking the view that both are unethical, so the trait didn't pan out, which I think is good, frankly. I don't think it's a bad trait. I wouldn't want it to pan out. I would reluctantly say, okay, I guess he's consistent, but it kind of sucks. I was happier when it didn't pan out.
Right, but I actually took the position that I'm very uncomfortable with factory farming and in the fashion that animals are raised, bred, and you know, slaughtered under the conditions that they are today. I mean, I guess that's similar to what Harris was generally saying, right? But if you had a and that's why I brought up the Aboriginal example, because they're not holocausting, to use that term. I mean, in the fashion that we're doing when it comes to factory farming, right? They're in a sense actually part of an ecosystem where they hunt. You know, they're integrated into that cycle. And it's, you know, done sparingly. The food lasts for a while. So, I mean, in that type of a scenario, I don't know. I mean, I think I would draw the distinction between treating animals in that fashion and treating human beings in that fashion.
Well, I'll let
why I asked about that. So
I'll let you choose the topic, okay? Because I think that there's more for us to talk about here when it comes to why you would take the view that only top-down action is what you support in the animal context, but in the human context, you support top-down action and individual responsibility. I think that the trait didn't pan out with just killing Bree, so it's not clear how it's going to pan out there. But if you want to talk about the Aboriginal thing, I mean, I'm not going to put that off forever if we really want to go to that. Which do you want to talk about?
Well, I'd only want to talk about that if you think it's relevant, because what my issue is with factory farming, I haven't taken the position that under all circumstances and conditions, the killing of animals for food is morally wrong. The same
I
way
don't
I
take
would
that.
say,
I don't take that
okay.
position. What if you?
Well,
I do take that the Aboriginals fall in the wrong category, but I don't take a categorical view that it's always wrong.
no, I mean, I assume you would say the only time it's morally justified is one in self-defense, or two if you're starving to death and that's the only option. So I'm not even talking about just in those type of situations. I'm talking about in general killing animals for food. Even if you have other options, I wouldn't necessarily put that in the same category as being morally wrong as I would with killing human beings.
Yeah, so we do disagree there, but I guess this is the thing is we're sitting here disagreeing about when it's okay to kill animals or not, and what you want to do is talk about the, I think, still wrong but more arguable case, right? But the case that I think we're all going to agree on, and the case that you're actually currently supporting yourself, it's like a far more obvious, easier case to like reason about. So it's kind of like the same as when someone wants to talk to me about like lobster rights or something. It's like like okay, well, I mean, maybe we can have a conversation about what degree of moral consideration we should have for insects or like little sea creatures or something, but like there's no way we should be having that conversation if we're not on board about like the rights of like primates or cows or something like that. So that's kind of how I feel about the Aboriginal thing. It's like, if I'll talk about it to humor you because you've been very good faith, but like, it seems a bit ludicrous to me to talk about gray zones or perceived gray zones when we don't have agreement on the like way more black and white area.
Yeah, no, we don't need to talk about it. I just brought that up because I thought it might be relevant to one thing we're discussing. But yeah, it doesn't seem like it's too relevant to what we were discussing before. So it's not something I'm, attached to discussing right now. So we
okay.
don't need to go there.
Well, yeah. So with the other question, then it's just, I mean, again, like it sounds like I can't understand why you would, like, do you really feel like with humans, top-down action necessary, but also there's an individual responsibility, and with animals there's no individual responsibility. And you, like, are you going to try to say that that's in virtue of those traits that you named before, or are you actually just not taking that position and there is an individual responsibility?
By individual responsibility, I mean,
just a responsibility to not buy the factory farm products. At minimum,
by the factory farm products.
We can talk about the other products, but for now, let's just talk about that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's a moral responsibility to not buy factory farm products. Yeah.
Okay.
That's not because I think that human beings and animals are identical in the morally relevant areas, but it's just because there is a certain level of suffering that takes place, and it doesn't matter at that point the differences you talk about in degree of sentience or intellectual capacity, etc., that can justify that level of suffering, right? So
I agree with.
Yeah, so to reduce factory farm, right?
Yeah, I agree with you there. I don't. For the record, a lot of vegans take this like insane position that all life is equal. I mean, that seems ludicrous to me. I mean, I'm not going to flip a coin between killing my mom and a worm. To me, the analogy I use is just money. Like, I can have $2, you can have $5. We have different amounts of money, but they're both enough to buy a can of Coke. It's the same thing with animals. Like, we have value, they have value, different degrees. Humans obviously have more, but both are enough that we shouldn't be like stabbing them in a like eternal global holocaust or something like that. Like, that's just beyond the pale. Like, so yeah. Now, if you agree with the factory farming, question is, like, are you actually like living in line with that, or is this just a thing that you're kind of realizing now in this conversation?
No, I mean, I've always taken that position in terms of factory farming. Now, I know we get into a problem here because the question is to what extent, unless you're out there, in the wild hunting, to what extent. I think 95% of all meat, I think, is sold in a.
I think it's higher than that. I think it's like 99 point something.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah, I haven't looked exactly. I know it's high, but
there's 34 vegans here. One of them has the figure.
On.
Someone posts the figure in general if someone knows it. Sorry, please continue.
Oh. Yeah. Okay. So if it is possible, I guess we can put that aside. But yeah, do I try to live in that fashion? Yeah. I mean, if I buy on the occasions where I buy meat, it would be free range, grass fed to the extent that it's possible. I don't know to what degree they falsely advertise about that either, but I try to do the best I can when I do consume that. And then that would, I guess, lead to the question of whether or not it's justifiable to do it even under those conditions. And obviously I know you'll take the position that it's not, right? And then we'll get back into this discussion about what the relevant difference is, right? You would ask, would it be justifiable?
I'd first point out that you're now 99.9% in agreement with my position, or like something like that, right? You're like, now, I mean, I guess if you've always held that position, fair enough, but like our ethics are overlapping now in the vast majority of cases, and now we're just haggling over a gray zone. And that's why I like to do the major stuff first. It's like it's a way more obvious situation, and it's the majority of what's happening with animals. So we have huge overlap there, and obviously like just living consistently in line with your values, which is to say, like, not in an offensive way, to not be a hypocrite. You would just not buy those things. And then when it comes to the family farm stuff, I mean, it's just the same thing. Like, we're talking, like, have you actually been to a family farm? Do you know what it's like?
I've been to farms where there's free range. I mean, I don't know family. I mean, family would have to do, I guess, with size or number of acres or number of, units of production or bread. I suppose I've been to free range farms and I've seen those conditions. And the thing you said, like if there was infinite utility, right, or infinite, well-being, you would take the position with both humans and animals that, bred into existence a wonderful life. If we take the free range farming and let's just say, free from predation, they live the way they're naturally meant to live. I mean, roaming, it's let's just say it's, a degree of well-being, obviously not infinite well-being. So they're not in a miserable existence or bred into a miserable existence. At the end of that life cycle, whatever it is, can you tell me what the objection would be? Speaking, let's say, if, large cattle.
Yeah, well, I mean, so one or two things. First of all, it's just important to kind of like deal with some of the like language or some of the marketing shit that's used. Like, I'm sure you are with your Marxist analysis and your like understanding of capitalism and stuff. You probably understand how garbage a lot of marketing. So when you see terms like free range and shit like this, like your bullshit detector should be like going off, like.
Well, that's why I said to the degree to which false advertising takes place, I have no idea.
Oh, I didn't even catch that. I didn't even catch that hedge. Okay, fair enough. Then, if we're talking about sort of the objection, it's like, well, I'm not necessarily going to make an objection, right? Like not anywhere in here am I making the case, this is wrong, here's my argument, this is wrong. I'm just kind of like consistency testing your ethics. And
right.
I mean, so far it seems consistent, and so far it's come out consistent on the good end, but maybe it won't this time, but it's just the same kind of thing. Like, I mean, say that were the degree of well-being that disabled people were gonna have by being farmed. It's not infinite well-being, it's just like, they get like, I don't know, maybe like they don't get their, like, what kind of things happen on a family farm? I don't know. They're like confined to like a field. We can like, I guess we can grant that maybe they're not getting their like tail docked or something like this, if we assume we're talking about the cases where there's not false advertising or something like this. But, in those kind of situations, like, are you taking the view that you wouldn't have a problem with the farming of disabled people?
Well, so again, in the current reality, because that would have, detrimental consequences for society as a whole, and we know that empirically, right? We've done experiments, or there's studies on that. There's there's historical evidence of how a society can be corrupted when you start doing this type of thing to human beings. We have
that's a new trait.
In the Nazi, the actual Holocaust. It began, with. So there are practical considerations for something like that.
Yeah, but that's a new trait making its way in. So now it's not just about their cognitive capacity, which was basically, like, I know you mentioned language too, but all of that ultimately came down to like cognitive capacity.
So I only brought up this new trait because if we were talking about in the here and now, in reality on this planet, then that's like the hedge I would make. But if we're talking about in some hypothetical world where a species was evolved to be, to lack the traits that I specified and to resemble animals in the relevant areas, and that was, done through evolution and hereditary traits, and you had another species, a more intelligent one, breeding them in that fashion. I mean, to be consistent, yeah. I mean, I can't say I could morally object to that in that hypothetical world.
But again,
outside of this world, right? So
well, keep in mind, like so when we talk about this world, your position is don't holocaust the disabled because they don't have all of these factors. There's like members of the species who aren't disabled, stuff like this, right? But we can have beings who are the same physically and mentally, right? Like it is just Bree, and she's just getting stabbed in the throat. And the question is like, are you actually okay with that?
And in this hypothetically, we're saying she belongs to a species where that level of cognitive function is the norm.
Yeah, it's just the whole species. It's all just Bree. The whole species is just Bree.
Yeah, and then, I mean, and you're asking, if she was given a life where she could have the same level of well-being as, say, a free-range.
She's given a life like a free-range cow, and then stabbed in the throat.
Yeah, I mean, in this hypothetical world or in this scenario, I would have to say, yeah, to be morally consistent, right? If I take that position now, I would just have to say yes to that. I mean, it sounds horrible, especially because we're talking about a disabled person and using the actual name, and it's a disabled person who's part of a species. Let's be clear, where that's not currently the norm. Right?
Yeah, but it would be the same. It would be the same person, though. Same mind, same body.
Right.
Like you can. The thing is, you can accept that if you want to be consistent, but it's just like I'm not like. Despite the protestations of some people, I'm not actually socially retarded. I can sense like your aversion the second you start talking about this and your hesitation, right? Like you clearly have an impulse against this, and like if the goal is just to come out consistent, so you can justify eating a hamburger or something, like I'm not going to be able to sit here and tell you you're inconsistent. All I can try to do is get you to honestly reflect on your values.
I mean, I'm not trying to do that, right? Yeah. I mean, if I wanted to justify my consumption habits, I would just say maybe it's inconsistent. I like doing it to cows, but or I have no problem with it being done.
I doubt it. You sound like the kind of person who's like smart and has an education and stuff, and probably to some degree prides himself on not being like inconsistent and not making any coherent sense. I'm going out on a limb and saying that, right? I assume you wouldn't be quick to do that, even though you say you might. Like you really think you'd be comfortable just saying you're like inconsistent? Like I don't know about that. I'm skeptical based on
No, but I'm also not going to take champion consistency at the cost of something else. Like I don't know, that debate with Destiny where he talked about Aboriginal tribes. Yeah. I mean, if consistency comes at that cost, then it's not. And so.
But the option there isn't just evil consistency or inconsistency. There's consistency in the good direction. There's just just consistency of just don't fucking kill them.
Right. Yeah. No.
What's wrong with because what is holding you back from just taking that position? I mean, I can sense when I talk to you that you don't like the thought of slaughtering Bree. It's completely clear to me that you don't like the thought of killing Bree. Why would we even try to craft this position about intelligence level and stuff like this and try to get as abstracted as possible from reality? It's like the fact of the matter is just you don't fucking like it, and you probably shouldn't support it.
I don't know if that aversion is due to the fact that there's a psychological attachment to the fact that she looks like a Homo sapien, right? And that on some other planet, even on some other hypothetical scenario where she was part of a species where that cognitive function was the norm, that I'd be held back or I'd be averse to that treatment because she looks like a Homo sapien. I don't know. I mean, if you actually change it and say, the same cognitive function as Bree, but now she looks like a pig, just based on how humans evolve. There's this bond, this psychological attachment that I think, and it worked. I think it partially, it was an evolutionary trait that helped, to the development of consciousness or the emergence of consciousness and cooperation to a certain extent, at least some would argue. So I don't know to what extent my aversion is based on that.
But but
to be morally.
You took an anti-realist type view on morality, though. It doesn't really matter what the aversion is based on. It's like the presence of the aversion is just what it means to say that the thing is morally wrong on your view. You're not a realist about morality. So
That's true. No, but I mean, aversion, I made the distinction, right, that aversion can be there because of socialization and psychological factors you're not even aware of, and yet you might take the position that, said action or said behavior is either morally wrong or
say that
morally
it
just.
turned out, say that I was somehow able to prove to you that your aversion to rape was something you got indoctrinated into. Would you actually, at that point, somehow, like, just feel comfortable with rape? Would knowing that you got indoctrinated into it make you say, yeah, like I'm fine with it, I guess?
No.
So it doesn't even matter. It's like it's kind of like, why would we even care? So like, what was I gonna say? So when you try to say, like, maybe when we talk about some other possible world where there's just a planet full of brie, and you're like, well, maybe I'd feel differently about that world. It's like, well, we're not going to know, because I'm not going to be able to, like, just bring into existence a parallel universe where brie is being holocausted, and I wouldn't if I could. But all we can do is make a guess and try to your best of your ability to understand what your evaluation of that situation is. And to my understanding, your best evaluation is that you wouldn't want brie to get stabbed in the throat, even if it were just a species of brie. Unless I'm mischaracterizing you, unless you would want that.
No, I'd definitely be uncomfortable with that. I mean, there's also the issue of the utility function. I mean, are they being a...
Cut out. Utility function. Are they being... you're not coming through. You're lit up and you're not making noise. That might be a glitch. You might want to exit and rejoin the channel. Just disconnect, reconnect. Guys, post in general, is this a Discord glitch, or can you still hear me? Am I still coming through? Can't hear him. I'm fine. Yeah, it's on your end, Ansari. Discord just glitches sometimes. You probably just need to leave the call and just come back. Or just go back to general, and I'll drag you or something. Yeah, okay, you guys don't have to keep telling me you can hear me. I saw the first comment. Damn, I was enjoying that conversation. Can I give you an estimate on when the Q&A can happen with Ants? Well, I mean, I didn't know that. I'm not aware that we scheduled a Q&A. That's just up to him. If he wants to take questions from all you guys, he's welcome to. We can do it after this. I mean, we finished our conversation about Vaush long ago. I was just enjoying talking to him about veganism. He seems to have vegan sensibilities, but just a bit of aversion for some reason. Unless I'm totally misreading his sensibilities. I wonder what's going on. I can't hear you at all, dude. You just gotta disconnect and reconnect. That's what I would try. Well, while we wait for him, if you guys feel like asking me anything, I mean, it's just me. It's not that exciting, but you can ask if you want. Social retard would misread the combo. Yeah, sorry about that. Isn't he basically conceded veganism is ethically required? I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I mean, it basically sounds like that to me. But maybe I'm not understanding something. What the fuck is this meme? Oh, you guys are so weird. I wonder what's going on with this. That is so strange. Do I support BLM? Well, I think that Black Lives Matter, but do I support the movement? I don't really know enough about BLM to give a take on that. If they support the narrative that there is a widespread racism pandemic, I'm not convinced of that view. Oh, I got a mention. Maybe Tim. No, it's an announcement. It's my own mention. Ants, I'm gonna try just like disconnecting you, and you can just like reconnect. Hopefully he comes back. Okay, he reconnected. Yes. Sorry, there we go. Haha, nice. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, look, the vibe I'm getting is just you don't like fucking stabbing Bree. It doesn't matter if it's a planet of Brees, you still don't like it. And all immorality is to you as an anti-realist is your, like, aversion to it, your lack of approval of it. So, the vibe I'm getting is you should just be a vegan, frankly. I don't know if you object to me on something there.
No, I mean, I have an aversion to it, absolutely. I don't know how much you heard before we got interrupted or whatever happened. But I mean, I have that same position when it comes to farm animals now, how the way pigs are treated or generally raised.
Yeah,
From
not
I would
just
have that
factory
aversion
farms.
to, yeah, right. See, yeah. So then the question is, if you had a hypothetical situation where a planet of breeze with that cognitive function, they emerge that way through evolution, would I be sufficiently opposed to treating them like that I would actually
Yeah, but
refrain
don't
from, participating in any?
yeah, but don't do the thing where
Yeah.
you
So
abstract it so far that you start losing sight of what you're talking about. Because it's easy to just say like layer of abstraction, and then, but the thing that has to come across is we are just talking about billions of individuals who are just like Bree, and they're getting stabbed in the throat. Like you would just look at this being, and you would not be able to distinguish them from Bree. So whatever abstraction you put in, I'm just going to remind you of the fact that like that is ultimately what we're talking about.
I understand that, and so I'm not sure if you heard me say this, but I'm trying to figure out whether that aversion is simply based on the fact that, I mean, there's a resemblance in terms of physical appearance, how Homo sapiens look, but that's not a reason to actually say that you'd be morally opposed to it, unless you want to use appearance as a type of a morally relevant trait. I don't think anybody would do that.
But we already established like if
psychotic
there, yeah, like, but it doesn't really matter why the aversion is there. It's just the presence of the aversion. It's all it means for something to be immoral on your.
I don't know if I agree with that, right? I made that distinction between aversion, and you said like you can't actually determine why that aversion is present. But I mean, I can look at certain examples now and say that I have an aversion to something and understand that aversion is not really based on any kind of a moral consideration.
Sorry,
it's just based on either socialization or some.
But by moral, we mean you wouldn't want it to happen. That's what I was using aversion for an analogy to that. Are you saying you would want Bree?
No, aversion.
But then forget aversion. Fuck aversion. Just we'll talk about what you said moral was, which is wanting it to happen or not wanting it to happen. If I present you with the situation of just billions of people just like Bree, like, do you want them to be stabbed in the throat as long as they have a like life where they're like in a field?
And this is what I'm trying to figure out. If me saying no, like my instinct is to say no, but I don't know if that instinct right now is based on, and I'm not just trying to, at all costs be consistent here. I'm actually trying to figure out if my instinct to say no is based on my actual belief that something like that shouldn't be taking place, or if it's really just based on some kind of a psychological attachment I have where I wouldn't, in this hypothetical scenario, have a problem with it if it, was a species that resembled farm animals cognitively.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I think, yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, sorry, go ahead. I've cut you off a million times.
That's all right. Yeah, so I was just going to say that my instinct is to say no, but as I said, I don't know if that's based on the fact that I actually wouldn't want it to happen, or if it's just, as I mentioned, some kind of socialization, psychological attachment to appearance. If there was a hypothetical world where you had where a species which resembled this Bree, this individual, with the same cognitive function, which is probably below that of certain animals like pigs, as we talked about, and they were actually being raised, let's say in an ethical situation, roaming, having a decent life up until the point that they were slaughtered and then used for food, like if that was happening on this world. I can't say I'd be morally opposed to that. Like just thinking about it, based simply on the consistency test and the traits I gave you, I'm uncomfortable with it. But I'm uncomfortable with what's happening with animals.
But again,
farms at the
moral on your view just refers to whether you'd want it to happen or not. So if we have a planet full of people like Bree, you would want them to be stabbed in the throat?
No, I'm saying if there was another species on that planet that evolved to, say, eat meat or to eat this species, and that species, the species Bree belonged to, is being raised in, say, not factory farm-like conditions, but in, say, the same conditions we have on free-range farms, etc. And then the end result was that, yes, they get slaughtered. Members of this species, which she belongs to, get slaughtered and eaten. Would I not want that to happen? And, based on the traits I gave and my general attitude towards animals under those conditions, in this scenario or in this earth, in this world, I can't say that I'd be morally opposed to it. I mean, that's...
So you would want for Bree and billions of people like her to be stabbed in the throat as long as they're allowed to roam in a field?
I mean, it sounds... See, this is the thing with the psychological...
But see, can I just point out, all I'm doing is we're just, all that's happening here is you're giving a framing where you try your best to not capture the aspect of the situation that you obviously are not on board with, right? And then whenever you do it, all I do is I just restate that aspect, and then you go, oh fuck, like I don't know how I feel. So the thing is with the aversion, it doesn't matter what the aversion is based on. Like if you end up reflecting on it and then losing the aversion somehow, then so be it, right? But the point is just that the aversion is there. You don't want this to happen. Unless I'm strawmanning you, it sounds like you don't want it to happen.
No, yeah, you're not strawmanning me. I don't want it to happen. Now, in the situation where it resembles what's happening on free-range farms, and she has, say, a species of breeze, and this is happening on the hypothetical world, would I be opposed to that actually happening? I can't say I would be opposed to that happening.
That's what I'm talking about, though.
Factory farming.
When I'm asking if you want it to happen, I'm talking about a species of people who are just like Bree, right? You would look at them and you would just see Bree. And I'm asking, would you want for them to be stabbed in the throat as long as they're allowed to roam in a field?
And the utility function was...
Same as on a factory or a family farm. Just the same as on the family... And this is setting aside that you're already going to be against a whole shit ton of family farms because of the bullshit marketing that's not actually... where they're not actually having a life like this. So we're even further than just you being against the 99% from factory farming. We're even further than that now. Now we're haggling over the small percentage where there isn't false advertising, which, how do you even sort that out? There's an epistemic problem even finding out when that's the case. But yeah, we're talking about just those family farms, and we're just saying that's happening to billions of brees. And the question is just, do you look at those brees and just say, yeah, I want you to be stabbed in the throat?
No, but I don't say that with pigs either. I look at a pig.
I know you don't, but that's why you should be vegan.
Yeah.
And sorry,
I think
have you heard of Challenge 22? Are you aware of Challenge 22?
No.
It's really simple, okay? It's a site, registered dietitians, you sign up, vegan meal plan, 22 days, super easy. Once you're in the flow of it, you won't want to go back, and you'll also just feel generally better about all this shit. Would you try Challenge 22? Can I get you to try Challenge 22?
I could give it a shot, yeah. I mean, I haven't tried vegetarian for like a period of time before I relapsed.
No, that's...
I mean, I don't know.
That's fucking awesome. So, yeah, they're linking it in general, but I'll DM it to you. And look, dude, you have any questions? We got the answers, okay? Well, if you ask about the origin of the universe, we don't know. But, like, there's plenty of doctors in here, like Avi. If you have any fucking medical questions, health questions, diet planning, anything you can't find on Challenge 22, which, like, it's fucking... They have everything anyway. We'll give you all the fucking help you need. Just put it in my inbox. So, I mean... Is there anything else you want to hit on, or do you think we've run the gamut here?
I think we've done it. I just want to reiterate my defense of Vaush, going back to the purpose of the conversation, was essentially rejecting premise number 3 and saying that he would use a different standard to judge certain actions when alienation is present. And your objection to that was that that would require a rejection of his earlier statements and his commitment to utilitarianism. So I'll accept that, since I don't know enough about everything that utilitarianism entails, and I've already said that it's very difficult to try to fit utilitarianism with a Marxist worldview, but it could be possible. But I think that's generally based on his statements, the position he would want to take and what he would say his position was. He tried to clarify it after you were muted, where he actually said what he really believes in terms of a morally right or morally objectionable action, and in the context of alienation and capitalist production. So I'll just
right.
just wanted to put that there. That's what my defense was based on.
Yeah, I'll give you the last word. I think we've largely agreed here. I think we agree on mostly everything with respect to Vaush. So yeah, I understand that you can reject this argument you're looking at if you're not a utilitarian, because one of the premises is just like utilitarianism is true, or there's no consideration other than utility. It's just one or another way of saying the person who this argument's being run on is a utilitarian. So of course it won't apply if you're not a utilitarian. But having said that, I think we also agreed that even when you bring in alienation, we still understand that when we support this, when we buy these products, we support this industry. And yes, we agree that top-down action is absolutely important and should be done. But we still end up ultimately taking the view that it's unethical. So it sounds like even if Vaush appeals to alienation, that doesn't get you to a point of saying it would be okay to support the animal holocaust or child porn or anything like that.
No, I think he would want to say, though, that certain actions you can't actually measure the impact on utility, and so therefore you need a different framework to even evaluate them. But again, I don't know if you can do that while being committed to his.
We have a general heuristic though. We agreed about there's a general heuristic here.
Yeah.
Like I granted you can have some case where somehow the money gets spent in some other way or something like that,
right.
And it turns out the action wasn't immoral. But generally speaking, you're creating demand and it's causing more of this to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. With that qualification.
Okay. So yeah, I mean,
I'd be interested.
Sorry, no, go ahead. All the PhDs are always so fucking polite, dude. When all of you guys, it's like I talk over people sometimes and they get so annoyed with me, and you guys just you always just listen. But sorry, please.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I wanted to definitely interested in hearing these views, but yeah, I'd be interested if he responds to this. I don't know if you plan on posting it, or if he I don't know if has he said he doesn't want to talk to you again, or he just stopped responding to you. Or he's actually said he's not interested.
Well, it was a bit mixed. So you guys can tell me in chat if I should post this. I mean, I think it was a really good conversation. I would post it. But yeah, it's a bit mixed. So he's basically said he doesn't want to engage, but he said kind of like, I know I'll see you again in politics or something like this. Like almost as if he hopes that I'll do it at some point so he can try to give a better defense, but he doesn't have to actually say that he kind of wants to give a better defense. But no, I mean, what I said is like, look, you're telling me you don't want to interact with me, so I'm not going to bug you anymore. Like, if someone tells me not to bug them, unless there's some reason I have to, like, I'm just going to fuck off. So, my door is open. I'm happy to talk to Vaush at any point. And I think despite the fact that he's, poisoning the well against me, calling me a bad faith actor, which admittedly I have done about him too, but yeah, I believe that, at least on this topic. I am willing to talk to him, and I think that everyone who does talk to me and who's not some crazy bad faith lunatic like you or like Xander or other people in his community like Ecotopian, that other poli-sci PhD authoritarian girl, who's very nice. I think that people tend to realize that I'm actually not bad faith, and that is just a crazy misrepresentation. So I'm happy to talk to Vaush at any point. But yeah, he seems like he doesn't want to, but he's open to it if I go and grill him, but I won't go and grill him if he said he doesn't want to. So the only way it'll happen is he actually reaches out and says he wants a conversation, and I'm happy to do it if so.
Okay.
Ants, do you want the last? So just two things. Firstly, you can have the last word, and secondly, people in here want to do Q&A with you. I mean, you didn't ever agree to anything like that. Do you want to take like questions from people for a bit, or are you donezo?
It's not. I'm a little bit stretched for time at the moment. I don't know if we're able to arrange something like this for
Yeah, that's fine. Don't worry about it.
Or even just tomorrow. Yeah, we can.
Yeah, they can DM you and set something up or something like that if you want to.
Yeah.
And yeah, just have the last word. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to say? Go for it.
I would simply reiterate the stuff I've said before in terms of it is problematic, right? Especially in the context of family farming. I do think there's distinct trait differences, and if we did that equalization and I give that stack and we create a hypothetical scenario on that possible world, I still think I'm uncomfortable with it. I prefer it wouldn't happen, but can I say for sure that I'd be absolutely against something like that generally taking place if we had evolved in a certain fashion on that possible world? I don't know that I can, and I don't know that I can actually say that I wouldn't even want it to happen. I think part of it is just, and this is where I would agree with an analysis of Vaush, socialization and how we think about these things, and not really giving it much thought. I've given it thought, but just, being separated from how production takes place and, how consumption is finally delivered is, part of the disconnect there, and I think that's true for all industries. I mean, it's not just, to be fair, the animal agriculture industry. I think we have those type of problems with a lot of industries where you have that separation between production and consumption, and so a lot of things are never even really processed about that.
And sorry, I really liked talking to you, and have a good day.
Yeah, thank you very much. Are you going to be posting this, or maybe?
Yeah, I will, but it's going to be on schedule, so it'll be next month. But yeah,
Okay.
It'll go up. People seem to want it, and I liked it. It was a good combo.
Okay.
And I'm sending you
Thank you so
Challenge
much for your
22.
time.
Yep, I'm sending you Challenge
All
22.
right.
Okay, all right. Have a good one.
I'll take a look. Thanks,
Yeah.
man. Yeah, you
Peace.
too. Bye-bye.
Bye.